Good morning, everyone. Welcome to TMHistoryIcons Cognitive Science Special. We're really happy to be with you today. We're so sorry that this can't be IRL in Sheffield with the usual kind of jokes and hilarity. We do really miss you, and we're hoping that we're putting on this event today that we can come together in time for the return to school next week. And I have it on good authority that we are allowed to buy new stationery for this new start of term. So we've got a jam-packed day for you today. We've got our cognitive science special, and we're really honoured to have Kate Jones, Ashley Bartlett and Hugh Richards join us today in what is going to be an incredibly useful session. Just a little bit of housekeeping before we start, which is just to say this event is recorded. So if at any point you don't want to kind of be captured, just anonymise your name and just be aware that the comments kind of might come up at different points. So this will be recorded, so if at any point you need to dip out because, you know, your child's running amok or your dog needs to go out, like, I'm with you on that sort of thing. It will be recorded and it will be available within 24 hours. So we've got an incredible day today, and this is due to the fantastic sponsorship that we have from Pupil Progress, from Wellbe and from Time Travel Edu, who without them this event would not be possible at all. So big thank you to our sponsors, and we're going to hear from those in just a moment. But just before we do, what we'd like to do is we'd like to dedicate this cognitive science special, this TM History Icons, to the wonderful David Bones. So many of you will know Carmel Bones, who's an incredible force in the community in terms of her expertise, but also her kindness. Unfortunately, Carmel's husband did pass this recent weekend. And so we'd like to ask the community to kind of join together and contribute towards the Samaritans to raise money, which is the chosen charity by Carmel. So David was a teacher at William Howard School for 16 years. He was an assistant head teacher for a lot of it, including in the sixth form. And they've talked about the tangible positive impact that he has had upon those children, and his commitment to make sure that everyone succeeded. And he was really passionate about maths. So what we would like to do is we're going to put a link into our chat and on the screen. You can read more about David Bones there. And what we're going to do today is we're going to be raising money. 50% of it will go towards TM Icons because we normally do a donation drive, and then the other 50% we'd like to donate to the Samaritans on behalf of Carmel and her family. And just to say, you're very much in our thoughts. We love you very much. And we're always on hand if you need us. So with today, we've got, as I said, a jam-packed schedule. We've got Ashley, who will be up first. We've got Kate Jones, and then we've got Hugh finishing it off. But to begin with, what we'd like to do is we would like to hear from our wonderful sponsors who, as I said, this event wouldn't be possible without them.
Good morning, Alex Fairlam.
Better late than never.
Thank you. Apologies. Internet issues. We love it. 2 minutes before we kick off.
Yeah, internet issues. He was having a bev. That's what he was doing.
I mean, this is still here from last night, but I wasn't. All right. It's not that. Okay. It's not that kind of breakfast. No, good morning, everybody. Obviously delighted to be here for another Teach Me Icons event with the history team. I'm just here really to introduce what Teach Me Icons is and what we're doing here. Teach Me Icons is a not-for-profit organisation which supports teachers CPD. All our events are free. All our recordings are free. If you want to get the recording, I know our trusty companion and team member, Scott Alsop, is behind the scenes doing our wonderful tech today in the background. So he will be firing up the link to the recording through the session today. So if you haven't picked that up yet, you can get it. There he is.
I'm just lurking at the side as always. We wanted to make it as real life as possible, so I'm just sitting here chunnering away about things that go wrong while brilliant speakers blow my mind.
I'll go back to my novel. I think it's important to know.
What would you come up with? Like, will you have the test building as your background, or will you be in ancient Egypt? Who knows? Who knows? Maybe
I'm not risking anything today.
Come join me on the Tyne. Yeah, we'll do fog on the Tyne.
Right. So, without further ado, our events, we mentioned they're free. All our events are sponsor funded. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to welcome Brett Griffin, who's the founder of Pupil Progress, into the event. Good morning, Brett.
Morning. How you doing?
How are you doing this morning?
Yeah, very well, thank you. Yeah.
Now I set Brett.
Yeah.
Thank you. I set you a challenge, didn't I, in the English event last Saturday, which was to try and speak for less than 1.5 minutes, and you actually managed it. Which, if anyone knows Brett, that is a hell of an achievement. So, but on a genuine level, Pupil Progress have supported us now for the last 4 years. But beyond that, if you haven't tried their software, then I highly recommend you do when it comes to reducing workload, which is really a big part of what Pupil Progress is. It's a workload reducing tool. I'm going to hand over to Brett now, who's going to tell you a little bit more.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. As always, I know we get a lot of thanks, but I do thank you guys for the opportunity. I know you choose your sponsors wisely. I can't stress enough. I couldn't be more proud of our business supporting such an incredible organization. So many people on the webinar this morning. I will dive in. One of the reasons for the personal address this morning, there is a video that is going to play today that's about 3.5 minutes long, which is going to tell you how the software is useful. The reason for the personal address is actually we have been working really hard to actually secure a government grant. Okay, so I'm going to share the screen now just to show you that we've got a grant-enabled access. Now, our system is really useful right now. It's going to help with calculations of the teacher assessed grades. It's going to help you organize your data. It's going to help you be able to find out exactly where students are working at now and find out all those teaching gaps, what you're going to need to teach now between now and the summer period when you're going to start to collect that data for your final judgments. We've been able to secure a grant that allows you to use the system at no cost to the school. So 2 subject areas up until the 31st of August. This link is going to be shared on this Teach Me Icons. I can see it in the chat now, where you can see you'll be able to look at all of the terms of use. There is no commitment to this, so you'll be able to read all of the terms of how you can get on board. There's no application process. Even if you miss this link, you can just click on Start Free Trial at Pupil Progress, and you'll be able to see it brings you through to be able to select your subject area, and you can choose another subject area in your school that can get involved with that. So I just wanted to make it really clear that we've been working really hard so you can get that support in such a difficult time. I really hope you enjoyed today. I'm excited for you, and it sounds like the energy in the presenter's voices means it's going to be a good day. So thanks for your time this morning.
Thanks, Brett. Thank you very much. I would highly recommend checking out that link for Pupil Progress throughout the day. Remember, you can follow the hashtag on all social media, hashtag TMHI on Twitter. We are streaming at the moment through Twitter. So we are on the TM History Icons Twitter account. There's a stream there. We'll pin it to our Twitter account as soon as possible. Equally, if you want to watch on YouTube, we're streaming through 2 YouTube channels. We've got it on the Teach Me Icons YouTube channel, and also we've got it on Mr. Allsop History on YouTube as well. So we're streaming to 3 locations today. So that's sponsor number 1. Our second sponsor today is Welby. Welby have also decided to come on board as a sponsor with us. We appreciate them. We thank them. They are enabling this to be free. They're enabling the recording and the resources to be free, and everything we do in terms of the speakers and everything else that we have here. I'm sure Alex will talk more about that later. So without further ado, here's a little introduction to Welby and what they do.
A third of new teachers leave within 5 years. School recruitment targets missed since 2012. UK teacher job satisfaction among the lowest globally, and stress and mental ill health is the #1 cause of long-term absence. And all this was before the impact, uncertainty, anxiety and added workload from COVID-19. There is a solution that will help you solve these problems and effectively tackle the causes of poor staff well-being. Introducing Welby. Welby follows an evidence-built process, which means you can easily assess the current well-being of your staff. know what to focus on for the biggest impact, track progress and capture ongoing staff feedback. As a result, your school will keep more of its staff who are happier and more engaged, improve student outcomes, and likely save £20,000 to over £100,000 annually. 12 months of Wellbe includes an online survey, detailed report with benchmarks and recommended actions, anonymous feedback tool, resources and ongoing remote support to simplify and speed up your journey and deliver the outcomes you need. All with a money-back guarantee. Schools we work with have found this transformational. To book your free demonstration or to find out more, get in touch today.
And so we appear to have lost Tom again. Unfortunately, he's not having much luck with his internet this morning, sadly. Thank you very much to those of you who have joined us. Thank you, of course, to our sponsors. We've taken a look there at pupil progress and also, of course, Wellbe. We're going to see a little bit more of them later, along with our third sponsor for today's event, which is Time Travel Education, who have prepared, as usual, a wonderful little video, all in costume, all themed, which we'll be seeing a little bit later on.
Sergeant Parsons. It wouldn't be an event if we didn't have Sergeant Parsons. I can't even say his name. Crikey.
You need more coffee, mate. There we go.
Exactly it. So a big thank you again to our sponsors, and we can't wait to hear more from them as well. So without further ado, we're going to have our first speaker today, which is the wonderful Ashley Bartlett. And excuse me, I had to write down everything that he's done, so apologies if I kind of look into the side. It's just when you've got someone, the bio of the three people that we've got today, it does require a little bit of kind of making notes on. So Ashley is a deputy program manager and lead subject tutor. He's involved in the Leicester skit where he is that lead subject tutor. He is an SLE and a curriculum leader in Leicester today. He's a curriculum leader in Leicester. We're very honoured to have Ashley with us today, and for him to share his expertise with us. He's got so much that I can't wait to find out more, and what I think is going to be really practical and something that we can really implement from Monday. It is the start of what we might call a new term. And so with that, Ashley's got some really kind of key strategies that we can implement. So without further ado, I'll pass over to Ashley.
Okay, thank you very much indeed for that more than kind welcome. This is very surreal because I'm just talking to my presentation. I think there's over 800 people signed up this morning, which makes this an incredibly daunting gig. But when you're just talking to your own PowerPoint slide, perhaps that lessens the nerves slightly. So welcome, ladies and gentlemen. This is something of a daunting gig, and that comes from somebody who's done eulogies, weddings, including my own, an awards evening where I was once billed as a low-rent Stephen Fry. But I feel somewhat unqualified to speak to you despite that lengthy bio this morning. Now, that's never a good way to begin and secure credibility with people who have given up a Saturday morning to be here. But I say that because I'm essentially going to tell you about some of the mistakes I've made. They are mistakes in my career. I've only got about 45 minutes, so I haven't got time to stray beyond the professional. But what I have done is to rectify some of those mistakes for the good of the young people that I teach. And in doing so, I hope that you can avoid some of the same mistakes and adapt best practice in cognitive science to your own settings. So a lot of what I'm going to say is not my own work, inverted commas, rather what I have collated as I've had the absolute privilege of working with schools and organisations that I've detailed on the slide, and I've included their Twitter handles as well, and a doff of my cap to them. It is very much the work of experts that I've drawn upon, many of whom are gracious and generous enough to interact via Twitter, and amongst whose number I count my fellow speakers today. Now, how's that for imposter syndrome when you are sitting amongst or alongside such greats? But joking aside, it's about time in teaching we started utilising research and listening to experts. Indeed, not doing so was part of the problem. Now, I read once that one of the rules of effective and engaging public speaking was to break the ice and get the room on board with a gag. Well, here goes. And because there is rarely such a thing as an original joke, I've taken this one from Mr. Gordon's joke book, and I thank him for it. Now, if you don't yet get the joke, then don't worry. Whilst a good joke shouldn't have to be explained, today I will reveal the punchline within, and you'll be laughing by the end, which is probably the second rule of public speaking, possibly. So, many years ago, I went to a training session, billed as effective teaching in the classroom or some such title, and I was asked this question as a serious start. So, okay, let's be serious. What type of learner are you? Just have a little review. I think there's some sort of chat box going on, so why not put your answer in the chat box? No, I can't take it anymore. I'm sorry. Of course, you, me, we are not any of them. It's absolute nonsense. And it's this sort of Cogsci psychology that passed for cognitive science in education for many years. It's utter tripe. It's a waste of time and effort, and a fine example, if we needed or wanted such a thing, of teachers working harder, not smarter. And that's what I'm here to address this morning. My career has seen me go from teaching hard to teaching smart. And a big factor in that has been my adoption of cognitive science. Believe me, I know we all work hard enough without giving over our weekends and our evenings to producing 4 different worksheets to pander to this sort of nonsense of visual, auditory, and kinesthetic. And if you're still doing it, if you have planned a lesson for next week to cater for learning styles, then I'm not here to wield a stick with which to beat you. Lord knows there are plenty out there who will do that for us. 99% of teachers work with incredible moral purpose. But if they've never been told that this is nonsense, then there is a danger they are still working hard and not smart. A lot of what I'm going to say this morning shouldn't be groundbreaking or new. Indeed, some of the cognitive science has been around for over 100 years, but it will be new to some of you potentially, and that's not your fault. Let's not beat ourselves up for that. We are only culpable if we continue to do what we've always done, because it's easier to do so, or because we spent hours on that resource in our PGCE year. We sat up until 1 a.m. doing it. And on the subject of what's easier, cognitive science allows us to make our lives that bit easier by teaching smarter, not harder. I'm not saying that your job will magically no longer be hard. Especially in this past year, good Lord, we've worked hard. But we don't need to be martyrs to the cause by producing 5 different coloured worksheets for every class, because we once went on a course and was told that's differentiation. Or we once had an observation where the differentiation box was ticked. So let me take you back. I am a history teacher after all. We're all history teachers, so a little bit of history. This is where it all began. Now, there I had to do some digging for that photo, and I hope it never comes out again. I was one of those working hard for many years. Pictured in the top right is 22-year-old me in my NQT year, which would be 2005. And I began my career obsessed with these vague transferable skills in history. I mean, heaven forbid we should worry about the history, the content being taught. And I was praised for that. I was nominated for a teaching award. I was consistently graded outstanding lesson observations. And I achieved all this by employing VAC, employing Brain Gym, dressing up, and I've got plenty of photo evidence of that. There we go. Thankfully, they're all old enough to be pre-GDPR, so I didn't have to worry about that. You can see that by the lack of grey hairs and the smaller waistline on the suit. I had students make paper planes with answers on to deliver the answer to me. And people had been paid a lot of money to tell me to do this. I thought I was good. I thought I was outstanding. I was focusing on the performance. All of this featured in my classroom. Good Lord, I even once secured a 1, an outstanding, in a lesson observation for a lesson which involved students running around the room to collect facts from information stations as part of a treasure hunt. Now, I had spent hours preparing, laminating, cutting up the resources that I then blue tacked around the room during my lunchtime. And the melee that ensued involved one student stepping on the foot of the assistant principal who was observing. But this was all okay, because in my feedback, I was told I'd, quote, accounted for their learning preference for kinesthetic learning and activated them to carry out their own learning discovery journey. No, I hadn't. What I'd done is created a circus where aspirations were so low and learning so minimal and shaky that, if I remember correctly, the plenary was something along the lines of, write down 3 facts about the Industrial Revolution on a post-it. An hour of these students' time I had taken that they would not get back, and they could perhaps muster 3 facts on a post-it note. Now, where did this nonsense come from? Our desire to cater for visual, auditory, and kinesthetic learners? Well, it was at best an oversimplified version of Howard Gardner's 7 multiple intelligences, which themselves are arguably talents or skills, and even they are now considered dubious. Cognitive scientist Daniel T. Willingham posted a video on YouTube back in 2008 entitled "Learning Styles Don't Exist." And if you still believe they do, go and look it up. And yet I know some of you will have been told at some point in your career by well-meaning, experienced colleagues that you need to plan lessons based on different learning styles for the classroom. And so you did, with the best of intentions. Professor Bob Bjork, one of the world's leading neuro experts, has similarly published a video on YouTube in 2015. He led a team of 4 psychologists that concluded that learning styles have no research foundation. They're appealing, yes, but then so is all snake oil. If anything, all of it just provided a finger for some parents and some students to shift blame to teachers and accuse them of not teaching the way my child learns. Yet a recent survey by Seneca Learning revealed that the majority of teachers, the majority, would you believe, still believe learning styles are a thing. Now, during a clear out of my study during the first lockdown, where I'm coming to you from today, I found a memo that had been delivered to my pigeonhole back in May 2007 from a member of the senior leadership team explaining how I needed to show that I, quote, knew my students by catering to their learning styles. And I know if I dig around in my hard drive, I have lessons still where I catered for auditory, visual, and kinesthetic learners, dutifully labelled as they had been after a 5-minute questionnaire completed in a citizenship lesson. The fact we wasted our time as teachers and our students one shot at school on this utter nonsense makes my blood boil. Yes, students learn at different rates. Yes, they present different barriers to learning, but psychologically, we're all the same. And even where students do insist on claiming preferences, we must not and cannot pander to them, as very few spheres in the world would take account of this. So let's be clear. We all have amazing capacity to learn, and we all learn in the same way. Yes, students with specific learning needs may require more scaffolding, but they do not need a VAC questionnaire. And just before I get off my soapbox, the left brain, right brain myth also needs stomping on too. And there's plenty on YouTube that will do that for you. This is where my career started, but I'll hold my hands up now and say, even as I progressed and took on TLRs, it simply allowed me to spread some of this muck further than my own classroom door. To my own now eternal shame, I stood on the stage in a school hall in a whole staff meeting and led 100+ staff members in a round of brain gym. The idea that we needed to train the left and right sides of our brains to work collaboratively by writing our names in the air with our non-dominant hand, this was once endorsed by, and studies were even funded by, what was then the DCSF, what we now call the DFE, far more affectionately. Their website still exists. The Brain Gym website still exists. It still promotes non-peer-reviewed claims published on the sorts of websites that you pay to submit your work, I'll say no more, in an attempt to take schools' hard-won funding by blinding well-meaning school leaders with pseudo-technobabble. Now, let's not get all black and white here. I am not Ferris Bueller's economics teacher, Now, there's a reference for some of you of a certain vintage. YouTube it afterwards. Seriously, it's a classic piece of cinematography for a couple of minutes. We do all need to maintain our personality in the classroom. We need to be interested. We need to spark interest. But it's not down to us and our performance to be that sole source of interest. Now, I am perhaps something of a 7 out of 10 traditionalist these days. There's a fantastic blog on this if you visit the TL Ideas blog. It's by an English teacher, but very relevant. Now, by being a 7 out of 10 traditionalist, there is still a defense of fun in my classroom, of course. I'm not saying that you cannot drink apple juice disguised as urine to introduce medieval medicine to year 7 or year 11 for that matter. But when and if I perform, as in these photos, I need to take care. Do my students just remember the dressing up? Or do they remember the knowledge I want them to take away? There are studies out there that show enjoyment, fun, and humour promote endorphins. And endorphins give us an emotional response which help us remember. It's why we remember a wedding day, for example, as long as it was a happy one. Others suggest that emotion can just be an interference to memory. Daniel Willingham tells us that whatever you think about, that is what you remember. Memory is the essence of thought. So bear this in mind when planning a fun lesson. Is the only thing that's remembered the fun? Do they walk out, your students, remembering that Sir dressed up, Miss put on a silly voice? 10 out of 10 traditionalists might forget that we learn through emotion and that things that create an emotional response can be better remembered. But ultimately, let us all not forget, we are creating memory, not memories. And I'll end this preamble with this concrete example. A former student of mine came to observe my teaching just before the first lockdown. It was a proud moment for me. She was coming to the end of her BA history degree course in Sheffield, I think it was, and wanted to be a history teacher. After a morning of lessons with me, we caught up over lunch. And she said, "Sir," because she couldn't get beyond still calling me sir. We're the same with our teachers, be honest. "You're still you," she said, "but your lessons are quite different." "I expect so," I replied. "We're much more research informed now. What did you notice?" I asked. She thought for a moment. "There used to be more silly voices, more accents, more dressing up, more moving around. I remember all of your lessons," she smiled. "Ah, yes," said I. "But do you remember what those lessons were about?" There was an audible silence as the penny dropped. Now, that didn't put her off, by the way. She's applied for teacher training, sadly not with us at the Leicestershire Secondary Skit, because she's not going back to Leicester. But I had not intended to put her off. As I tell my trainees now, you're coming into teaching at the best possible time, as we are research informed. We're working smart, not hard. We're not doing the nonsense we were told to do previously. So cognitive science. What is cognitive science? Well, from a psychological point of view, it's the scientific study of the mind and mental processes. In layman's terms, what is it for us in history classrooms? It's the stuff that we wish we had been told, certainly I wish I'd been told, and should have been told 16, now almost 17 years ago. And it makes me cross, and you may have already picked up on that as a profession, we wasted so much of our time and our students one shot at education not doing this stuff. My trainees will tell you this is very much my soapbox. If they want to wind me up and watch me go, they'll mention Brain Gym or VAC or information stations and treasure hunts. It is from the robust evidence base of cognitive science that we can now pin down in concrete terms something that we debated for too many years. That learning is, as Sweller et al. Have noted, a change in long-term memory, without which nothing has been learned. This is what we're aiming for, a change in long-term memory. And if I had more time this morning, I would talk more about that, believe me. Mark Enser quoted in one of his books that learning leads to motivation. Learning leads to motivation, not plasticine models shoehorned into a lesson or Lego. And believe me, I've attended CPD on that. What breeds success is learning. Success is infectious and breeds engagement, or as Peps McRae more eloquently put it, success and proficiency is autocatalytic. It fuels itself. And using cognitive science is how we achieve it. If you want a great starting point for this, I will give a shout out to Michael Fordham, who in June 2017, Teaching History, published an article called Thinking Makes It So, Cognitive Psychology and History Teaching. It's a fantastic article and a great place to start. So as a result of this, my history lessons now include opportunities for retrieval practice based on the work of, amongst others, Kate Jones, who I'm exceptionally humbled to be rubbing shoulders with this morning. They are lessons that are clearly presented. They avoid cognitive overload. They promote retention. They take on board suggestions of Daniel Willingham and Oliver Caviglioli. And I know Hugh will also be giving a much more in-depth analysis of Ollie Cav's work later. They include opportunities for dual coding as proposed by Oliver Caviglioli. They provide a clearly narrated story of the past alongside opportunities for modelled scholarship and historical writing. I use a system base advocated by Dan Warner-Meanwell and others, and is supported by action research from Teaching History. Now, one of the first things I had to get my head round, bear in mind I'd been trained some 16, 17 years ago, and I had been trained and told things like this. Now, this requires an adjustment of mindset if you are still teaching with that in mind. If you were told that, and that's what you believe. Many of us will have been told during our training that essentially too much teacher talk is bad. Now, that's not to say we don't aim for lean, concise exposition. And I'm very fortunate where I am at Castlemead. We spend entire afternoons just looking at the minutiae of the exposition of our big question. But our voices are not the enemy. We have the knowledge. We are the experts. We love our subjects, and we are best placed to deliver that knowledge efficiently from the front. If you want to see somebody doing that absolutely brilliantly, look up some of Ben Newmark's videos on YouTube. That is, in essence, direct instruction. We are the experts. Tell our children what they need to know. But direct instruction has also made me reflect on what I want my students to do. Indeed, it's made me focus on the what far more that I want to deliver, the curriculum content, rather than the how. For too long, I was hung up on the activity, what I was going to get the students to do. Would they be running around the room? Would there be enough engagement? How many card sorts would I need for this lesson? I'm delighted to say I haven't used a card sort in the last year, partly COVID. I can't see where I'll be using one again. Because the activity, the how, took precedence over the what, and it should never have been allowed to. And indeed, if we're basing our lessons on cognitive science, then it gives us the freedom to think about what we want our students to learn, because the how is a given. Okay? It's given to us. It's done for us. The how is simple. It's methods that are supported by cognitive science. Let me give you an example. Let's take this source as a typical sort of piece of material I still use in lessons and use for many years. Now, a typical starter activity that I might have used, certainly I was praised for it as being best practice. I've seen others use it. Might be to ask students that, what do you think is happening here? Now, what that leads to is a guessing game. And essentially the guessing game is guess what's in teacher's head. And here's another one of my soapboxes that my trainees will tell you about. I hate playing guess what's in teacher's head. I shudder to think how many hours my students spent playing guess what's in teacher's head. Because Rosenshine tells us that the most effective teachers led students to experimental activities only after, not before, the basic material was learned. So if I have taught my students nothing about this image, if I'm giving them no schema, then why on earth was I spending so long asking them, what do I think is happening here? And I know that for years I got nonsense about this being a building on fire and there being a big crowd because there was a play going on this stage. And all I was doing was wasting their valuable time trying to get them to work out what was in my head. They had no hope. Now, if I go back to a direct instructional approach, then what knowledge do I need to give my students before they can even begin to analyse this source? Let's just take a moment to reflect on the knowledge that is actually needed. Now, why waste time asking questions, guessing what is happening, if the students have never been taught just some of the basic information that's around that image now? I'm not saying that you can't use an image as a hook to develop some anticipation for learning. Of course not. But if you want students to understand, if you want students to know what's going on, you've got to have established a schema first. And the most efficient way to do that is to tell them, use direct instruction. And that can also be through a historian speaking. We have subject experts in our field. Let's put them at the heart of all we do. I listened to Ben Walsh recently, and he said you would never come across a science teacher who wouldn't dream of drawing on the work of the Curies or Einstein or Oppenheimer, or even worse, and we did this for years, then asking 14-year-olds to question the work of those scientists. Yeah, for years we asked nonsense like, oh, how trustworthy is this historian? They're a historian, they're a subject expert. Yes, we want to grapple with their interpretations. Yes, we might want to challenge their interpretation with another interpretation. But let's not send a 14-year-old into the bear pit against David Olusoga. He's the expert here. And if we don't, sorry, I went off a tangent there. Get off that soapbox. If we don't deliver the knowledge our students need first before we want to grapple with sources, then we're leading to too much potential for misconception, for missed learning. Asking students to have a paired discussion about this source with no prior knowledge is just recycling ignorance if the schema has not been secured. Graham Nuttall's book, The Hidden Lives of Learners, shows that students must already know something to know more. It's why experienced cooks tackle recipes with greater ease, for example. Therefore, we as teachers are limiting learning if we are not first building a schema for our students, the schema they need, the knowledge that will build on their knowledge before we get them grappling with sources, with interpretations. We need to provide context, especially our EAL and our DA students. They often have the weakest schema. Excuse me. Is it any wonder they switch off from lessons when we were asking them a guessing game around sources, which left them thinking that their more advantaged peers just had knowledge as if by magic, or that we were leaving them to gather the right knowledge by chance from an information station stuck up with blue tack on the classroom wall. So it's a very simple message. Students with more prior knowledge will learn more and therefore know more. They'll have the knowledge of the powerful. They'll be socially mobile. They'll unlock the doors of the elite. But we're the ones with the knowledge now, so we need to give it to them. So who's going to deliver this schema? Well, yes, I've said we are subject experts. We're well placed to impart new knowledge via a powerful narrative. Indeed, Willingham tells us about the power of narrative. But we can also equip our students with powerful new knowledge via a short video clip, for example, alongside teacher exposition, supported by images and keywords. Where video clips are used, then make use of the academic historians in our field and make sure that they are representative wherever possible. Historians from the BAME community, female historians. Harness their storytelling. We have some fantastic storytellers amongst the history and historian community. Make students keen to know what happens next. Willingham advocates this in Why Don't Students Like Schools? He says that stories are psychologically privileged, so they are treated differently by memory. They are more likely to be retained because they are interesting. They're easier to comprehend. They're easy to remember. It promotes our minds seeking causal connections. So don't ever believe that story is something that you should cast aside. And it upsets me that history teachers had previously cast story aside as a technique. I work with a fantastic colleague who is just the most wonderful storyteller. She's an absolute expert at it. And she's teaching me in her second year of teaching to rediscover the power of story, to make it part of your teacher toolkit in place of treasure hunts and role plays. Now, once we've established the schema, we're going to need to set it up for new learning to be hooked onto. Yet even teaching new knowledge via direct instruction, Willingham reminds us we must teach knowing that students will forget. Okay, it's just going to be the way. And we will overload working memory very quickly. So we need to begin with retrieval practice. It all starts with retrieval practice. No, really, every lesson should. Barrett Rosenshine told us this in Principles of Instruction back in, published almost 10 years ago. And Ebbinghaus and his forgetting curve is on the screen. Ebbinghaus knew this in the 1880s, and yet some of us knew better. Some of us didn't listen whilst we were getting students to produce paper aeroplanes. To enact retrieval practice is simply the process of attempting to recall memories. Practicing retrieval is going to result in stronger storage and retrieval strength. So by providing opportunities at the start of our lessons to make links and revisit information, essentially helps information move into our long-term memories. It tackles the forgetting curve. And as Sean Harford at Ofsted said recently, knowledge becomes sticky. The more you know, the more you learn, which helps children gain deeper understanding over time. It also promotes engagement. It shows our students that learning is possible. Learning is engaging, not performing via rap or throwing answers around the room. I once told a colleague, now retired, at the end of a lesson observation, it was a very good lesson, but you can't have a 1 because the first 5 minutes were spent reviewing learning. This lost learning time, where no new learning had taken place, was essentially a waste. And I did this with a straight face whilst the vice principal nodded enthusiastically beside me before signing off that I was now fit to observe lessons because I knew what I was looking for. I'm glad to say that now I wouldn't dream of delivering such feedback. I don't know quite where those bizarre transitions have come from. That's given me a cognitive overload. Apologies. So, everything now in my history classroom starts with retrieval practice. Okay, I think this is an example taken from Kate Jones's book, actually, who will be up next. And this is supported by the work of Daisy Christodoulou. Try saying that with your teeth, nothing. As Kate is here on the podium, I shall say I shall take very little airtime and defer to her on this. She's the expert. I'm merely the disciple. But this is an example of retrieval practice modelled here, and giving students that opportunity to recall knowledge from previous lessons that they're going to need for today's lesson is absolutely vital. Where's that knowledge come from? Well, it should be contained within our dual-coded knowledge organisers, but more on those later. And you'll notice the presentation is very, very simple. It's simple, it's consistent, it's clean. And that draws on the principles of dual coding. Now, it doesn't even have to be this complicated. In its simplest form, start your lessons with a recall quiz. Okay, here I am recalling from the story that I've already told about the cause of civil war before we delve down into source analysis. Okay, and it can be this simple as a default. And don't worry about it becoming tired. Students like consistency. They like to know where they stand. Just in case you're wondering what the answers were. Okay, here's another example from year 7. Again, the same consistent, simple quiz. But that is how we should be beginning our lessons. And when we're into the delivery, a common myth in education that we addressed earlier is that individuals have these preferred learning styles. If taught in the preferred manner, they are more likely to remember what they've taught. There's no empirical basis for this, for thinking this is the case. But what does seem to be the case is that we're more likely to remember something if it's presented to us in more than one way. So support your exposition with the principles of dual coding. One principle of dual coding, and Hugh's going to talk much more about this later, is graphic organisers. They're a method to support dual coding by supporting the communication of hierarchical and causal relationships between factors. This is one I worked on a couple of years ago with Household Language Services, actually, in Challenge Partners, in the Bell Foundation, a project I was involved in. There's a fishbone diagram, okay? And this can support the exposition of causation of an event, in this case, the English Civil War. And that delivery via graphic organisation just helps our students to build that mental map of how these causes fit together. It's what we have in our heads as experts, but our students are not many experts. They're novices, and we need to take them with us. And I might use something like this to support my exposition. But ultimately, I'm going to move into the story, the source, and the scholarship of good history teaching. Now, this is from a resource developed by Dan Warner Meanwell. He's very generously, and much of the history community have generously put these online. I think I'm not misquoting Mary Myatt when she's commented on it as, or on resource like this, as useful and beautiful for learning rather than aesthetically pleasing. In itself, it supports the principles of dual coding, and it incorporates guided reading. It incorporates that story element that is so important for the memories to be held. And it also promotes that motivation that Arthur Shimomura talks of in his Marge model. It gives our students the mental motivation to be convinced to avoid all manner of distractions, because everything is focused on this clear resource. And the story presenter just reinforces that exposition by the teacher. It comes after that teacher exposition of the narrative that's needed, the context, the schema that's needed before we even consider delving into sources and indeed scholarship. Christine Council has noted that reading and discussing scholarship is a core priority for history teachers. And therefore, we should be hunting out this scholarship as part of our lessons. A teacher who goes into their career relying on the scholarship they read age 22 is a teacher frozen in time. Now, where do you get the time to go delving into scholarship? Well, it should be a joy. It should be what we want to do. But we find this time by not spending hours cutting up card sorts and laminating resources and all the things that we were doing in the interest of fun and engagement. To communicate to scholars that history keeps on changing is absolutely vital. And it addresses many observations in history teaching, some going back to E.H. Carr as far back as 1961, that historians have an element of choice over the history which they choose to engage. It is a luxury rarely bequeathed to our students. They don't have the choice. They have what we tell them. So we take advantage of being able to delve into scholarship and choose what we're going to present them. There's so much rich scholarly work recently. If you're teaching Jack the Ripper, consider doing it based on The Five by Hallie Rubenhold to teach the inquiry into lives of women in the context of the 19th century, rather than traditional whodunit that I'm as guilty of having done as others. What we want our students to be able to do is engage with scholarly excerpts to build up that bank of knowledge that they can use the views of any given historian as evidence to support a line of argument. And I'm quoting there from Holland in the 2017 Modern History Review. Here's another example. This is a Year 7 example. I show these sometimes when people are amazed that Year 7 are dealing with interpretations. Well, if they're not, then you're fighting a rearguard action by the time you get to Year 10. But all of this is rooted in cognitive science. The clarity of the resource. There's one resource for every 2 lessons in my classroom. The privilege of story here and the understanding of the privileged place that story has in our memories, and the understanding that we need this context. We need the context of the story before we can delve into source analysis. We need the context of the story before we can delve into scholarship. And we need to have looked at the evidence that historians grapple with before we can look at the scholarship that they have themselves devised, because we know that interpretations are constructs of history based on evidence, and we need to model that to our students. Which is a segue into the next thing I wanted to say, and that is modeling. Okay? And I do, you do, and I do, we do, you do approach. Okay? Rosenshine says that example is not the main thing, it is the only thing. And I do, we do, you do allows us to transition from direct instruction, from telling our students, to them being more independent. Of course they need to be independent. We want them to be historians. It does so in small steps. So put modelling at your heart. By separating, by transitioning from direct instruction into the 3 steps of I do, we do, you do, there is a clear transition, a clear handover from teacher to student. Now, this particular method, the I do, we do, you do, is advocated by Greg Thornton. He's on Twitter at Mr. Thornton Teach. And again, he's another colleague in the community, as so many of us are, who is exceptionally generous with his resources. And these can be acquired and edited for your own practice. I talked earlier about knowledge. I'm going to sort of segue back into knowledge organisers. Knowledge organisers have, I think, for some, they've become the new snake oil. Now we've moved on from visual, auditory, kinesthetic. They are not a panacea. No, they're not. But again, I think it's Mary Myatt who talks about using knowledge organisers to master the minimum of the curriculum. Some argue that knowledge organisers place a ceiling on achievement or on knowledge acquisition. Never so. What they do is they provide all scholars, all students. Sorry, it's a Castle Mead thing. All students are scholars. I knew I'd slip at some point. Provide all students with the same level playing field of knowledge, an equal foundation, if you will. Tom Sherrington has talked about the danger of disengagement for our lowest priority attaining students if knowledge isn't shared equally, if it's seen as something that is the preserve of just a few. I mean, let's face it. Some topics in history are complicated. So our students need the essential knowledge to tackle those topics. They need clear diagrams. They need explanations and key terms on one document. This can be really helpful. This avoids cognitively overloading them. Now, our working memory can at best deal with 5 or 7 chunks of information at once. Knowledge organisers help avoid an over-reliance on performance, of being able to answer a question now or on a sticky note at the end of a lesson, but not recall it later. Because they allow us to set simple, spaced self-testing. They allow us to inform those recall and retrieval activities at the start of our lessons. If a child misses a lesson, they have a constant point of reference in the same vein, because every child has access to the same knowledge organizer. It gives a level playing field of knowledge. It gives children a more general awareness of the basic schema of a topic, rather than just that handful of privileged children who've been fortunate enough to visit museums or done hours of research over half term or go on foreign holidays to historic sites. But remember, the children, by the end of a topic, should always know more than what's on the knowledge organizer. We're offering the chance to master the minimum. We're doing that through a reduction in cognitive load to free up space for thinking, and thinking is a good thing. Now, it's interesting to compare resources like this, and I'm not shaming anybody here, but some of the often most expensive resources shared on TES, for example, covered in colours and fancy graphics and cartoons, are not necessarily the ones that are going to be the most beneficial.
Ashley, can I just interrupt real quick? If you can just click hide on the little screen share icon there so people can see the... Thank you very much, mate. Thank you.
It's all right. I didn't realise everybody could see that. I thought it was just me. If you compare these knowledge organisers with some of the most colourful, the most glorious piece of artwork, colours and graphics and jaunty angles scattered everywhere. They're beautiful. They are, but they're allowing aesthetics to override learning. Professor Barbara Tversky, who's an expert in memory and spatial thinking design, says knowledge organisers should include only information that is useful for the task. Yes, it could be exaggerated, perhaps even distorted, if it's the most useful information, but it must be presented in a way that's easy to follow. And again, it sort of pains me that some colleagues have spent hours and hours and hours on producing resources that are beautiful, but they're not beautiful for learning. They're overbearing, they're promoting cognitive overload, and they're just taking up your Sunday afternoons when you could be pushing your kids on the swings in the park. So, oh, look at that. That's not bad for timing. I was told to talk for about 40 minutes-ish, and I'm just coming up to it. I'm quite proud of that. So who is teaching harder and who is teaching smarter? Well, I've got two teachers on the screen. Consider these two teachers as I come to the end of my presentation. Who is the most effective teacher? At one point, we would have said teacher one. Maybe that was you. Maybe you aspired to be that teacher. It was certainly me. And that was me working hard, not smart. Daisy Christodoulou says that we were victims to the cult of the outstanding lesson. However, as our thinking has moved on, it would be good to think, and as we've embraced cognitive science, that most people would agree now that they would rather be teacher two. The teacher who focuses on embedding rich historical knowledge. The teacher who models the drilling down of sources. And that was something else I would have talked about if I'd had more time today. Considering I was worried I wouldn't fill the time, I had to end up with about 3 hours worth of material into 40 minutes. It's the teacher who knows how and why students learn, that can take them from surface learning, knowing facts, to deep learning, using that knowledge for analysis and synthesis. This teacher may not be all singing and dancing, but they understand the learning process. They are the smart teacher. The history teacher utilizing cognitive science in the classroom to create memory, not memories. And yet they are the teacher who 10 years ago may have felt forced out of the profession. And on that sobering note, and I apologize for ending on a sobering note, I shall thank you for your kind attention. I assume you have been kindly attending. I've just been talking to my PowerPoint slides, but I would welcome any questions. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you so much for that, Ashley. That was incredible. Like, it was a combination of part confessional, part storytelling, and part kind of strategies. And can I just say, thank goodness we have another advocate of getting rid of VAK, because I just can't handle it. I just can't handle it. And there are so many useful strategies in there in terms of dual coding and the retrieval practice, and really kind of making reference to cognitive load and using modeling techniques such as the I do, we do, you do, is absolutely incredible. But I do think it was just so powerful to have that kind of myth busting going on. And yeah, I put my hands up. I've done the treasure hunt. I've done the running to the board. I've spent hours making, my year 9 tutor group every lunchtime laminating. It was like a production line. So it's really reassuring to hear you say, you know what, actually, let's just nip that in the bud and let's just go with. And I think the genius part, I mean, all of it was genius, but the bit that I'm going to take away with me today had to be the slide where you had think what, not how. What do I want them to learn? 70% curriculum content and the how. And I think too often it has been the how that's dominated. And it's kind of been like, you know, I've got to get them up. I've got to be doing a card sort, or, you know, I've seen this on a course, therefore I'm going to implement it the next day, that sort of thing. So that's been really, really useful there. So we'll just dive into the questions here. So we've got one.
Please.
Nye, who says, how do you advise your students to use knowledge organisers? Do you advocate look, cover, write, check style methods, or verbally talking through them?
So we provide them with a number of possible uses. We've put together a guide for parents as well to support students using knowledge organisers. I mean, yeah, they're one of those things that they're not a panacea, and if you simply hand them out and the students put them in the back of their books, or they walk around clutching them lovingly, hoping the knowledge will go into osmosis, there's going to be no impact. So we do, as with anything, we model with the students how to use them. Look, cover, write, check, repeat is probably the first model we use. We encourage parents to test using them. We encourage them to be generative and to create a copy of their knowledge organizer from their original. And sometimes, particularly for our lower prior attaining, where they need that learning modeled, you may have noticed there were numbers on the knowledge organizers, and we may say, go away this week and learn the first 5 facts, or the first 5 key events or key people, and then in a follow-up lesson, perhaps on an online quiz or through a retrieval activity at the start of a lesson, we will test those 5, and that's good for engendering a sense of success. It also chunks it right down, and it models the learning process. But absolutely, I'd say whatever method you use, you've got to model with your students how they're going to use those knowledge organisers.
Exactly, it's that kind of that Banana-Rama principle. It's kind of not what you do, it's how you do it, sort of thing.
Yes.
And I think you're absolutely right that it's all about practice. We're very blessed in our school. A big shout out to Rosanna Hume, TMFL Icons, who created kind of how-to videos for our staff, for our students, for our parents, and kind of just showing them how they use it in conjunction with retrieval. And we found that's what gave us the golden element of success. Because as you said, if they carried around like precious artifacts in a museum behind a glass screen where you can't annotate them, you can't engage with them, they should be covered in stuff. They should be like, yeah, exactly it. They should be annotated with. So that again is really, really great to hear. And the golden, the numbers, I'm stealing that. I'm going with that.
So they are working documents. And the other thing we do is we have in our prep time on a Wednesday afternoon at school, our scholars go back into their tutor groups. And they have 40 minutes of supported prep. And one of the things that they're encouraged to do in prep is access Quizlet. And we have a school-wide Quizlet of flashcards. And the knowledge organisers are also the Quizlet flashcards. So there's a synergy there between the knowledge being repeated.
Yeah, and I think, as well, I think knowledge organisers have been really, really kind of valuable during the kind of the COVID kind of year that we've had, in terms of if we can't get around the classroom, then they have almost like this textbook page, if you like, of like potential ingredients of knowledge. It's not everything you need to know, but it's got your key essentials and your spelling on there as well, which can be really useful when you're trapped in your 2-meter box and can't go anywhere. Can't helicopter around. We've got another great question from Sophie Hudson, and she says, what advice do you have for an RQT with a skit on how to encourage them to do this more when they're wanting to cut out card sorts? So what advice do you have for an RQT with a skit on how to encourage them to do more of the stuff that you're saying when they're blessed them with the best intentions wanting to do card sorts?
So sorry, is this a recently qualified teacher who is supporting a skit trainee?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So the RQT is the mentor?
Yeah.
Oh, right, okay. Okay, that's a tough one with maintaining professionalism. As somebody who works in ITT, I would want to speak to the ITT provider gently about where this love of card sorts is coming from. That's me sailing close to the wind. No, what I would do is I'd present them with the research. In fairness, there is no empirical research for card sorts having any impact on learning. There is lots of empirical research for direct instruction, what have you, and I would direct them to where I direct my trainees. I think it's Greg Thornton again, to his how-to guides. If you Google Greg Thornton's how-to guides, there's a lot of they're fantastic for novice teachers and for expert teachers, of giving very clear instructional methods for history classrooms and the research to support them. And I think we owe it, in all seriousness, we owe it to teachers coming into the profession that we are giving them research informed strategies, because this is why we have burnout within 5 years, because people are working harder than they need to. So I think you need to have that conversation and drill down into where this desire for card sorts has come from, and with the greatest respect and in the gentlest possible way, present the research for alternative methods. And if it is somebody who is currently with a training provider, I have 2 jobs. I'm a curriculum leader of history. Well, I have lots of jobs, but I also work with the skit, as you said at the start. And I would want somebody to come to me as a training provider if they were unsure of why trainees were being asked to do something. And I'd be unsure as to why trainees are being asked to cut up card sorts.
And I think as well, if we direct them back to that slide where you've got, where it's the content rather than the how. So I guess it's kind of coming back to that and kind of saying, well, why are you wanting, like, it? why is it that this is your focus, that you feel that you need to do it cards? Or actually, if we think about the curriculum, what is the best way to get this curriculum across to the children? Because you're right, we only have a finite amount of time with these children, and as we've learned here, that time is absolutely precious, but also in terms of teachers' well-being is incredibly precious too. So that I think you're absolutely right with that as well. We've got another really good question, which is from Zoe Benjafield, and it says, how do you avoid students remembering the wrong information from retrieval practice? So I guess, how you kind of stop those conceptions from being embedded.
Yeah, so I think you've got to be very mindful of what information it is you're asking them to retrieve. It's got to be the powerful knowledge. I worked at a school once, and they were asking students to retrieve how many days William was delayed before he came across the channel. Now I don't know, and I suppose I questioned why that was ever going to be useful knowledge. If it's something substantive, if it's a thread you're going to weave through the curriculum, like Parliament, or the idea of monarchy or church, then that's what you want to be asking them about. And equally, I think I didn't say this because I was going to run out of time, but I'm a big advocate for not using other people's knowledge organisers, but building your own, because I think your knowledge organiser should reflect what's powerful knowledge in your curriculum, and therefore your retrieval activities should either be reflected in your knowledge organiser or in the story from the previous lesson. So that should be your guide as to what is important. If it's on the knowledge organizer, it's important, powerful knowledge. So if it comes down to remembering the wrong information, I think it's about, a lot of it's about thinking carefully about the questions you're going to ask, because that's what you want them to remember, and memory is a residue of thought. If it's a question, I'm just thinking, Zoe, you may have been wanting me to tackle this question slightly differently. If it's a question that how do you tackle them remembering the wrong answers, then I think there, it's a bit of responsive teaching on your part. It does have to be low stakes, of course it does, a retrieval test, but a quick show of hands as to who got what right, and you're logging that, you're using that data as a teacher. If there's one question that there were a number of misconceptions around, then you put it in again and again and again, and you put it in next week's retrieval practice and next terms and next, until it's embedded and the schema is secure.
Yeah, and I think you're absolutely right, and it's about planning for those misconceptions. So almost preempting what are the usual misconceptions, and let's be really purposeful with those, and just kind of really say, look, these are common misconceptions, and then if they do get them wrong, talk about kind of the misconceptions and why they're wrong, and just really kind of drill that down. But I think
that metacognitive scripting has to be there. That really, really explicitly. Again, something else I could have talked about if I had 3 hours.
That's it. And I think it's one of those things that you're saying, that it is really true about the knowledge organisers, because there are some incredible knowledge organisers out there. I'm like, wow, mine look rubbish in comparison to it. Like, those look, not just aesthetically beautiful, but incredibly powerful. But I think you're right that, as much as mine might not look perhaps as those, it works for our progression model in our curriculum, in terms of we know what has come before and come afterwards within our curriculum, so we can make it powerful in that way. So I think that's a really, really good tip.
Beautiful for learning, not beautiful for aesthetics.
Exactly. Yeah. Beautiful for learning. That's what I'll say when my kids come to aren't as nice as the geography departments. Woe betide. I did not say that aloud. We'll finish off on one final question, which is from C. Bloom 1991, which is, how can you ensure retrieval practice doesn't take over the whole lesson timing wise? I think that's a really good question. Been there.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's Doug Limov who talks about it needing to be very concise. In fact, I'm just leaning backwards, because if I can find it, I know I've got a lovely quote, because this was something I was grappling with earlier in the year. Again, if I'm really honest, because we've all been there where you're doing a recall activity, and it's taken the first 10-15 minutes of the lesson, and it can't afford to. So I think the He says, desperately looking for the quote. No, I'm not going to find it. I'm not going to find it. It's about it being really concise. It's about it being there should be no teacher direction required. I think it can only be sort of 3 to 5 minutes. It's got to be carefully selected knowledge, and that's what's going to make it effective and make it have the impact it's going to have, because you've got to still give time for the new learning to come on afterwards. So it's got to be very carefully thought through, and I can't find the Doug Lemov quote, and that's really going to annoy me.
It'll make a nice kind of tweet later on when you find it and you're like,
yeah,
yes, golden ticket, I found it. And it'll be a nice kind of like golden nugget, potentially when Kate's on as well, so then we can get like double teaming on the retrieval. But
yes, indeed. Oh, if my AP is online, she'll kick me for not.
You can't the retrieval quote.
Yeah.
I need to give you a knowledge.
Okay. Speedy and selective. There we go. I found it. Yeah, Doug Lemov. It says your retrieval should be focused, efficient, reflect on what's needed for the lesson by judiciously selecting what to review and how. Review activities must be speedy and selective. That was it. Yeah, that is what I take away from that. Keep it speedy and reflective. Do not, do not make a big thing of them. Speedy, selective, make them efficient.
Yeah, pithy punchy to the point and reflect on it. Love it. Ashley, this has been incredible. Like, it's been such a pleasure. I could literally listen to you all day long, and I love how much you've kind of alleviated my guilt of seeing other things as well. So thank you for that. I feel kind of like, that I feel relieved it wasn't just me. But thank you for that. It's such a useful presentation in terms of, here are some misconceptions, and that's fine. Here's some stuff that we have done. This is why we shouldn't do it, and this is what we should do, and kind of really looking at some high impact stuff. And I think next week, that's going to be so powerful in terms of how you've talked about the knowledge organisers, you've talked about focusing on the content, because we are going to be distilling the content of the curriculum to the essentials. And you've shown us how to really purposefully do that without kind of spending hours up at night. So that's really fantastic, and thank you so much. I have no doubt that you'll look down on your phone, you'll have about 1,000 notifications of people asking.
That's what I could see it flashing. All I had on there was the timer. I couldn't be distracted. It would have split attention.
So I hope you enjoy the next 12 hours catching up on all the comments, the praise, the queries and suggestions. I know a lot of people would like to kind of have like a list of the blogs. Just to let everyone know that this is recorded and resources will be available within the next 24 hours. So if you can't get enough of Ashley, you can watch him again in the next 24 hours.
No one's ever said that, I promise you.
But thank you so much from the team, from myself, and on behalf of everyone else. Like, the comments in the chat is just incredible and testament to your work. So thank you so much for that, Ashley.
Thank you very much indeed.
So it's at this point in time that again, I'd like to remind you that this will be available as a recording, and the resources that will be tweeted out from our Twitter account. The recording might take about 24 hours because Scott Alsop, bless him, does need some time to do it. We don't make him work 24/7, not always, sometimes. So that will be available there. We have also got, at this point in time, a moment to have a look at our sponsors in terms of, we'd like to show, we've got Time Travel Edu presentation, who's one of our sponsors. So there are 3 sponsors that we have today, which is Wellbe, which we've heard from, Pupil Progress, and we've got Time Travel Edu as well. Tom, you're back. And thank goodness you put your filter on so that you save us from that beard.
Yeah. I've been getting abuse for wearing a hoodie. I don't see a problem wearing a hoodie. It's Saturday morning. Surely I can wear a hoodie.
As I said to Kyle, at least you're out of bed. It's a bonus.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. Listen, that was amazing, wasn't it, from Ashley? I agree with everything you said. Just totally captivated by everything he said. Absolutely fantastic. Just to remind everybody on the hashtag, if you're following on Twitter, you can use the hashtag TMHI. Andy Sweet is going to be on that account imminently to kind of retweet you and forward your messages to us as well while it's all going on. So if you want to do that, please do. The other thing is the donations. If I know Scott flashed it up on screen earlier, 50% of all donations today to Teach Me Icons will be donated to the memory of David Bones, which is the lovely Carmel's husband. So if you want to check that out, it's on screen now. Head over there. The other 50%, of course, goes to Teach Me Icons. And actually next month, we're going to be publishing our accounts again for the last year, so you can see where all the money goes. But essentially, we're all volunteers. I'm a classroom teacher. Alex is. Scott is. Andy is. Everybody is. So we do this because we basically love it. So without further ado, and that kind of links in nicely to our second sponsor appearance from Pupil Progress. So we're going to watch that video now. Thanks, Scott.
Our trackers encompass every history qualification and exam board, calculating grades exactly as the exam boards do. As data is entered, an instant grade is created for each student. Furthermore, as scores are inputted into our trackers, the teacher receives instant question level analysis alongside a RAG rating to show whether the student is above, below, or on target. Our trackers are so useful now because you are able to identify the gaps in students' learning. Once these gaps have been identified, you can create end-of-topic tests that link directly to each historical assessment outcome. These can then be uploaded onto your trackers. Once completed, these will clearly demonstrate the progress students have made, thereby closing learning gaps. This data that has been added allows for instant downloadable reporting. Our reports identify the current grade, average unit grade, and breakdown of each individual historical paper. They also demonstrate the percentage of marks achieved for each historical outcome. The reports clarify next steps for students and enable effective dialogue with their teacher about improving in history. As students return to classroom learning, it is likely that a mock series will run. Our software enables you to build in entire papers into your tracker. Once scores have been entered, you can use an average of the papers set or best paper to reflect the current position of each student. Our trackers enable a robust, data-based foundation for centre assessed grades. On all of our trackers, we have a separate forecast area where predictions can be made. You can download all of the information from your live tracking into this forecast area. Using your knowledge of students' progress online, in assessments and in the classroom, you can then adjust scores on your tracker to reflect the journey of each student up to June of this year. It becomes obvious to see how grades have therefore been achieved. On all of our trackers, there is the snapshot feature where you can compare the live tracking to the forecast. This will enable you to show the development of each question area alongside each historical skill. Once a grade has been decided, you can demonstrate if there has been an inflation, whilst justifying the areas that have seen progress alongside those that have stayed the same or even regressed. Fundamentally, our system gives a comprehensive data-based overview on the assessment of grades. Don't forget, you can access our system with full functionality for zero cost until September for your school using our grant-enabled access. Simply click on the link that you will see shared in this Teach Meet. Thank you for your time once more today, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the event.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back. Again, it's what I said at the beginning, really, which is a massive thanks to all our sponsors, Pupil Progress, Wellbe, Time Travel. I got cut off, actually. My internet died early when we were talking about time travel. But again, another individual in Nick, who is the founder and director of Time Travel Education. Hopefully, when educational tours restart again, goodness knows when that's going to be, then do check out Time Travel, because they're absolutely fantastic. They're a small company they're a local company. They will personalize everything for you, and do check it out. Hopefully the video played earlier. I didn't see, because as I said, my Wi-Fi just went off and that was it. So in a second, I'm going to hopefully hand back to Alex if she's there. If not, I think, oh, here she comes. There she is. Hi, Alex. Are you enjoying the day, Alex?
This thing first, mate. I'm ready. I'm just here. You say something, it happens.
I don't like this. I don't like the level of control you have right now to kind of add and remove people. In your
I should just mention that we've not yet played out the time travel edu video. We'll be seeing that after the next session, I believe.
Lovely, thank you. But yes, I do like the fact that Scott has control of this, because Tom is an unknown entity and rogue. Even his own internet is trying to sabotage him and cut him out of the event.
I think it's something here that you've done. I think you've put a microchip somewhere. I think it's a conspiracy theory. I've read it online. Seriously, I think there's something going on. Anyway.
Tinfoil hat ready for you, Tom. We'll get that tinfoil hat ready.
Right, I'm going now. Take me off, Scott.
No, I promise I'm not sabotaging Tom. He does that all himself. If anyone else wants to join in bullying Tom, please do. So the next person that we have up is the incredible Kate Jones, who was one of the original members of TM History Icons. And wow, what an amazing pair of incredibly fashionable high-heeled shoes they were to fill the incredible first team. So we're really, really honoured to have Kate with us all the way from the sunny Abu Dhabi. So, I mean, it needs no introduction, really. I mean, I feel like I'm not even going to do you justice, but I'll give it a go. So we've got Kate Jones, who is Head of History in Abu Dhabi. She is a blogger, a writer, a keynote speaker, an incredible historian. The first book was Love to Teach, and then the second one was Retrieval Practice, and Retrieval Practice 2 has just come out as well. She's an incredible teacher, an incredible educationalist, and very giving with her time. And what she doesn't know about retrieval practice doesn't exist, basically. So, you know, I'm sitting tight for an hour of just like absolute knowledge, and I can't wait. So without further ado, I'll pass over to Kate, who's going to be in a much sunnier location than me, and I'll be very envious. So take it away, Kate.
Okay, you're just muted at the moment. If you're just able to unmute yourself at your end, that would be. There we go. Oh, I've not spoken to you in ages. Welcome, Alex. Has done the nice intro. I'm going to disappear off again, mate. I'm just here causing trouble.
No, I need you, Scott. Stay there. Just help me. Right, is my screen sharing now, Scott?
We are all good to go. We're good to go. It's over to you.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Alex. That was a very nice, probably over the top, too kind introduction. But yes, I am first and foremost a history teacher and head of department. And I'm so happy that we're actually having this, because in my book, Retrieval Practice 2, Hugh Richards, who's also speaking today, he was a case study. And I write about the importance of taking cognitive science to the next level, about looking at what it looks like in our subject. And that's exactly what we're doing today. So, and as I said, I was part of the original TM History Icons team. And it's just so much more than history teaching, isn't it? Obviously, that is why we're here. We want to become better teachers. But it's just brought together so many wonderful people, made lots of friends, and it's just become bigger and better than when we first launched it. So well done to the team. So in terms of my session today, I'm only going to give a little bit of a background about working memory and long-term memory. I watched Ashley's session. It was brilliant. He's obviously discussed lots of areas of cognitive science. I think we're at the point where as a profession, we've got a really good grasp of memory, a good understanding, and we're ready to take those next steps. I'll also talk about the different types of retrieval practice, because that is all my session is about today, retrieval practice, but we know there's a lot more to cognitive science than just retrieval. Then I will give lots of history examples, and this is brilliant because every time I present, I almost feel like I have to say sorry for always including just history, whereas today I'm really in my element. I can really just talk about all the history examples. And then I'll talk about some common mistakes and how we can avoid them. These are based on my own mistakes, things I've come across talking to teachers, things I've seen online. They might be things that you can relate to. And obviously, this is what Ashley spoke about, where he was saying about how much he's learned and how he's changed as a teacher. But this is brilliant because it does show that we are very reflective as a profession. And then I'll finish off with some top tips for retrieval practice in history, and obviously a question and answer session. There were some great questions there about retrieval practice, and I'm actually going to talk about some of the questions that were posed are featured in my session as well. So because I've written a lot about retrieval practice, I hear this a lot. There's a lot more to teach and learning than retrieval practice. And of course there is. I am the first to advocate that. And I created this teaching and learning jigsaw puzzle to show retrieval practice is just one piece of a very complex puzzle when it comes to teaching and learning. But retrieval practice will be more effective when we combine it with those other pieces of the puzzle, when we combine it with a knowledge-rich curriculum, when we consider cognitive load, when we space it out, when it's embedded in part of our curriculum, when we give feedback, when the challenge is desirably difficult. So there's probably lots more things that you might want to add. Lots of people have said I should include direct instruction, and I'm always keen to hear how I could just keep adding to this jigsaw. But when I thought about what makes really good teaching and learning, they were the things that stood out to me. So I love this model. I keep sharing it a lot recently. I love the simplicity of it. And I think it's important to show the date, 1968, because again, building on what Ashley said, the research has been around for a very long time, yet it's only getting to us now. And as part of my new book, Retrieval Practice 2, I reached out to academics. I always feel like a name drop in here, John Hattie, Dylan Willem, the Bjorks. And when I did get in touch with Professors Robert and Elizabeth Bjork, who for me, they're the world leading experts on memory. Elizabeth Bjork started off by saying how frustrated she was that they have decades worth of research that still lots of teachers are not aware of. This is from the Bjorks, actually. I remember reading they were at university with Arthur Melton, or I'm not sure whether they worked with him or studied alongside him. But in the 60s, they knew this information about long-term memory and how memory works, yet here we are in 2021 talking about it now. And as Ashley pointed out, some teachers are still under the impression that learning styles is how we should plan our lessons. But also, I think we should have a word of caution about this model. So this is the learning process. We have the attention and encoding stages, where information has to actually get into memory. And as it was mentioned, working memory is very limited, the magic number 7. So we can hold about 7 items, give or take 2, depending on your working memory capacity. And I often give that example of you've walked into a room to get something, you thought, why did I come in here? I forgot. And obviously that's because we've had an overload with our working memory. So working memory, short-term memory, very limited in terms of how much information we can hold and for how long, about 18 to 30 seconds. And if it's not rehearsed, it'll be lost forever. And I think at the start of my career, all I focused on was the attention and encoding stage. Didn't fully understand it. I was just trying to get information into students' minds. And then the only time that I would try and get the information out would be an assessment. And that could be months later when so much time has passed that they've completely forgot it because it wasn't rehearsed and it wasn't regularly retrieved. So now we're aware of attention and encoding, as well as storage and retrieval. But I do think we've perhaps gone the other way, where we might rush to retrieve information before we've actually spent enough time in the encoding stages. And Graham Nuttall, Barak Rosenshine, Tom Sherrington, they've written a lot about this. Graham Nuttall writes about how we should expose students to information at least 3 times in different ways, lots of consolidation tasks, before we even consider getting to the retrieval stages. Now, in terms of storage, I will tweet out a link to the Bjork's website. It's the Forgetting Lab, and it is superb. I can't believe how much academic research is on there that is freely available to access. And they write about the new theory of disuse. They wrote about this in the 90s, and they wrote about retrieval storage and storage strength. So the storage strength refers to how secure that information is embedded in our long-term memory. For example, students remembering something from long-term memory, but it's a little bit patchy, there's gaps, they can remember bits, then that storage strength is low. But if they can remember it with accuracy, with detail and depth, that's obviously what we want. And then in terms of retrieval strength, that's how retrievable, how quickly and easily and confidently you can recall something. So you've probably been in a situation, and students have, where you think, I know this, I just can't remember, it's on the tip of my tongue, and it eventually comes to you. So it is there in the long-term memory. It was just that the retrieval strength was low. But then there's times where you ask a question, or the student is, and they recall it instantly. So it's important for us to have this awareness of storage strength, because if a student hasn't retrieved the information, it doesn't mean that it's not in their long-term memory. Perhaps it's just not that secure. Perhaps they just needed longer. And the only way we can combat that and improve that is by regular retrieval. And we all know that retrieval is recalling information from long-term memory. And as Robert Bjork says, always quoted, Tom mocks me all the time. He thinks I'm obsessed with the Bjorks, but I do actually plan to go to visit them at UCLA in America post-COVID, so he's probably right. But Robert Bjork says, using our memory shapes our memory. So what he means by that is using our memory changes it. Every time we recall something from long-term memory, it changes that memory, which should make it easier and quicker to retrieve in the future. So that for me is a great simple model in terms of how we learn. Okay then, now the different types of retrieval practice. You're all aware of these. This is probably the easiest one, multiple choice question. You identify, select the correct answer. We do a lot of that in history, and I'll talk about that and how we can do that even better. Then we've got cued recall with a prompt and support. Again, I'll give lots of examples of these. Free recall is where we recall something from memory without support, really. So a brain dump is a classic example. Write down everything you can recall about this, or an exam style question where there's minimal support. That is harder, it's more effortful, but it is regarded as the most effective. And then we also have written and verbal. And during online learning, and we've been doing that for a year here, we're just back in the classroom now, but I found this a real struggle to get students talking via Zoom and to have verbal retrieval opportunities. The reason we need to provide opportunities for both written and verbal is that some students, and you'll probably, when I say this, think, yes, I can think of students like that, who can verbally retrieve information a lot easier and more confidently and quickly in comparison to writing it. And I've experienced this with my EAL learners because I work in an international school. And it was really a light bulb moment for me when, and I share this story a lot with the 2 boys who I was very worried that they weren't being able to recall information in retrieval tasks until I did a verbal retrieval activity. And they were chatting away and their answers were brilliant and detailed. And I was so impressed. And then I realized it was because they are much more confident communicating in their second language English verbally than communicating through writing. So it was a literacy issue for me to be more aware of. In terms of what does the research tell us, research says younger students need more support with scaffolding and cued recall, multiple choice questions, but we can take that away from them. I'll tweet, when I say research, I will tweet out these links. That was a reference to a blog that learning scientists have written. But teachers say to me, which one of these strategies should I use? And my answer is use them all. Let's combine them, not necessarily all in one lesson, of course, but we need to think carefully about retrieval practice from a long-term perspective in our overall curriculum, and then short-term lesson planning. And Tom Sherrington wrote about varying the retrieval diet, and I talk about that a lot, and I say mix it up, use all of these, because there's pros and cons to each of these. For example, multiple choice questions are the easiest type, and they're not that challenging. And Hugh Richards writes in my book a really good section about this as well. Like in history exams, they're not given that much support, are they? So free recall will actually help them in the long term and help them with their exam preparation as well. But multiple choice questions, I'll talk about how they could be designed really well, or they could be, there's lots of bad ones out there, bad examples. So there's pros and cons to each of them. And the same free recall, I'll share some examples with you today. So what I did as part of my research was I just went on quizzes, because you can look on online quiz that other teachers uploaded. And first of all, these are all anonymous. I have no idea who the teachers are. Some of these are mine, not these two, but some of them are my examples. I think it's brilliant that teachers share their quizzes online so freely, and I would never ever want to stop that. However, we do need to be very careful, and I think teachers new to the profession, perhaps if you were a trainee or an NQT, you might go and look what quizzes teachers have already made and perhaps not be aware of that they're quite badly designed. So I was actually looking on quizzes for a quiz for my year. This is GCSE, the first one there. Who was Ebert? I think you can all just tell why that's a ridiculous question. You don't need to be a GCSE historian to answer that. And I'll talk to you about the Treaty of Versailles question and how we could basically take those two questions and improve them to make them much more effective. Here's some more questions. So this question about Henry VIII and which child became a famous British monarch. Now I would assume, like you probably are assuming, it's Elizabeth, but again, a student might answer, well, Mary, female monarch, burning of the heretics, and Edward, the child king. Should be area for discussion when it comes to multiple choice questions and debate. They are black and white. That could be a different task in itself, which of Henry's children became the most significant monarch or about their legacy. That could be a different type of task, but I'm just looking at multiple choice questions here. And then this one as well. Oh my goodness. Why is Mary so outraged? Well, first of all, we should be obviously modeling past tense, but look at the responses. It's just not good enough. There's lots of issues with that question as well. So there's lots of these out there. Honestly, you search and there's lots of comedy options, and I really do. I like to think my students will describe me as having a good sense of humour, and I like a laugh with my classes. But I think retrieval practice is not the opportunity to do that, because there's so many multiple choice questions, and I used to always do this myself. I used to put in an option that was so obviously wrong, and then I would probably put in a comedy option, and then before you know it, you've just got two plausible options, including the correct one. So that's really reducing the effectiveness of a multiple choice question. And also another point here is with quizzes, it gives you a question timer. Now, Craig Barton says in maths that students should be able to answer a question in 10 seconds. And I have just suggested for humanities, it depends. If you've got a question like this and your responses are sentences, I would lean more towards 30 seconds. Obviously, if it was dates, you might not need as much time. But when I contacted Jules Dorby, Gareth Morwood, I contacted specialists who in terms of SEND and students with learning difficulties and retrieval practice. And one of the key things that obviously they were talking about was that they need more time. They need more time to read the question carefully, to understand what the question is asking, and to read the options. And retrieval practice is meant to be low stakes. So when a student, let's just say with SEN, learning difficulties, sees the timer, that can put pressure on them and it becomes high stakes. So I think we need to be very careful about question timers. Quizzes is brilliant because you can edit the timer or you can remove it. And again, teachers say to me, what should I do? How long should it be? I can't give you that answer because you know your classes. If it's a class that you think they'll all cope well with the time and they might need it, then do that. If you've got students in your class that you think actually they need longer, then remove the timer. That's where our professional judgment comes in. And there's not always these black and white answers with retrieval practice. Now this links in really well, actually, with a question that was asked to Ashley and what Ashley spoke about, essential knowledge and knowledge organisers. And it's not easy to create a knowledge organiser. I have to think very carefully, what is it I want students to know? And that really should be your starting point when it comes to retrieval practice. My argument for these questions would be, is this essential knowledge? Do students absolutely need to know this? In terms of the date, again, I've been very guilty of including that type of question. I often don't know the years that monarchs were born, but I know the years that they came to the throne, because that is obviously more relevant, more significant, more important, and they are the key dates that I want my students to be able to recall as well. So if I was to include what year was Henry VIII born, then my students would obviously, and quite rightly, assume I need to know that date. And then what might happen, let's just say an A-level essay, they will then litter their essay with these types of facts, these isolated, cold, correct, but random facts. And this is where people think, oh, retrieval practice is this pub quiz trivia. And even recently, I was creating a quiz on Google Forms, and I had 16 questions, and I thought, oh, I want to round it up to 20. And I started including questions like this that were non-essential. And I stopped myself, and I thought, no, students don't absolutely need to know that. Just stick with my 16. Okay, so it's worth going back and looking at your quizzes and reviewing them. And perhaps there's some questions that you can just get rid of. And something that I haven't done in the past is make time for feedback and reflection, or retrieval practice hijacked my lesson, as you spoke about in the question and answer session. So actually, why not take the approach as less is more, reduce the amount of questions, but actually they're more effective and essential in terms of the knowledge. So this one about the contenders is one of mine, actually, that I would use, probably thinking, what's wrong with that? Well, there is an issue here, and I was totally oblivious to this until I read a research paper, I think it was only published about 2 years ago, that gave some advice about multiple choice questions, and it advised not to use all of the above. And the more I thought about this, the more I thought, that's really good advice. So first of all, I think when we include all of the above, it looks like we're trying to catch out students, and we should never want them to think that, because we're not trying to catch them out. But also it can cause confusion. So let's just say, for an example, a student selects Hal Godwinson, and then on quizzes it will go, incorrect. It's not incorrect. He was a contender to the throne. It's just not the answer that I was looking for, because I was looking for all of the above. So then what might happen later is a student might think, oh, well, I got that wrong. Hal Godwinson wasn't a contender. He was. So let's just remove all of the above. There's other reasons why, but for me, those were the reasons why I felt actually it's not a good strategy. And I keep, again, to go through my quizzes and remove that. I thought I was being really clever by including it. This one I don't think is mine. I think I've just screenshot this. It's a really bad question, isn't it? We should also, that same research paper said we shouldn't include none of the above, because actually this is a wasted retrieval opportunity, isn't it? It would again, confuse students. And when I tweeted this out recently, somebody said a really good response, actually. They said they remember the question like this, and they remember being annoyed that they knew what the answer was, but they had to select none of the above because there wasn't the option to select the right answer. So again, it's just confusing. Let's scrap all of the above and none of the above. Okay then, so back to eBert. Oh my goodness. Right, we could easily just change that to make it a challenging and effective question. So instead of just putting who was Ebert, that sounds a little bit random anyway, I've just rephrased it. So who was the first president of the Weimar? And again, I could show this to literally anyone and they would get that answer correct, wouldn't they? Because the two answers are comedy, they're obviously incorrect, they're not plausible distractors. And the question is a stem, we have the right answer, and then the other options are distractors. They should be plausible. And as you can see here, we have the correct answer. We have Hindenburg, who became president but wasn't the first. We have Kaiser Wilhelm from before. So we've got the plausible distractors there, which would be quite interesting to see if this were to select one of them. But this is also a really useful strategy, and it was from the same research paper I've just quoted. Put in I don't know yet. And there's been a little bit of debate about whether we should do this. I personally like using this, and a few other teachers have said. And when I first started this, I think students thought, what's the point in me selecting I don't know? I'd rather just guess. But that's a problem with multiple choice questions, isn't it? That we don't know if students are really retrieving that information unless we perhaps have some further discussion with them. And Blake Harvard on Twitter @effortfuleducator has written a lot about taking multiple choice questions further. But I explain to my classes, if you're going to use I don't know yet, you need to explain explicitly why. It's because we're using retrieval practice to identify gaps in knowledge. So when they put I don't know yet, they've identified a gap that is useful for them to be aware of, and then they can close that gap. And then it's also useful for me as well as a teacher to see where the gaps are. And actually, I stuck with it. And when I scan through multiple choice, I don't spend too long looking at their answers. I will scan them though, and I will look. And I do find it interesting when students put I don't know yet, and they will do that. So it's a little bit like a safe option as well. Because the other thing is students have spoken to me, and sometimes when there is a comedy option or a really obvious one, they just think, is that a plausible one? They didn't always realize that it's a comedy option. And then when they've selected it, they feel like a complete idiot. And obviously we don't want them to feel that way. So this is a safer option. So I created this the other day just based on some of my top tips from what I've read, my own experiences. Keep the options there, 3 or 4, so you could have your correct answer, too plausible, I don't know yet. The language, the layout, always clear and concise. This one is, I think, absolutely essential for the history community. And I think this is where we really need to work together, is collaborate within our departments on question design, but also the subject communities. David Goodwin, he's a geography teacher on Twitter, and he tweeted out, I want to create some geography retrieval roulettes, but I don't want to do it on my own. Can I have some help? And lots of geography teachers got involved. And then they've all created these question banks. And it's been great in workload, but also because they all wrote down what their areas of specialism was in terms of the topics. And then they said, right, I'm going to do a quiz on this. And somebody said, right, I feel quite confident I'm going to do a quiz on this topic. We really should. But it relies on a lot of kindness, actually, I think, because it can be a little bit worrying to say to somebody, what do you think of my questions? And feedback should always be, even with adults, kind, specific, and helpful. And I know some teachers have said, I don't want to put my questions out there in case somebody does say that they're not good. And that's why I did try and anonymize all of them and share my own examples. So as a community, we should really do that. Then, as I said, avoid all none of the above, make time for feedback and reflection. I don't know yet. I'll talk about how we can go beyond factual recall. I think that's something that I've been very guilty of history teachers, because in history we can have a lot of terms and dates and facts and stats, which we need to go beyond that. And I will share some online quizzing tools with you because they're just brilliant for workload. You can look at other teachers' questions, you can transport them to your own, you can edit them. An online quizzing tool will mark it for you. We absolutely have got to take advantage of what technology can do for us. And I know actually this has just been mentioned already. I saw Greg tweet this out the other day. I said, oh, can I stick this in my presentation? So this is a history guide. Lots of the references to the research and the do's and don'ts, avoid using all of the above. Lots of the things that I've already said, with more advice. There's lots more, there's videos and so on. And also in the how-to collection, Rachel Ball has done, she's got a fantastic blog. She's talking more specifically about retrieval practice. She's blogged about retrieval practice. So do check that out if you haven't already. But coming back to how do we go beyond the factual recall? Well, this is about how we should really use multiple choice questions in terms of tier 3 vocabulary, subject-specific vocabulary, having the correct answer, whether that's a definition or the term, having plausible answers, and then that I don't know yet. And then I was asked this question a lot. I'm not quite sure how to go on factual recall. So I created this resource, a pyramid. And the idea is that it's a scaffolding approach to higher order thinking, where we start off. This is different to my retrieval grid. I'll talk to you about my retrieval grid. My retrieval grid is based on points, and the point is 1 point last lesson, 2 points last week, 3 points, and so on. And that's linked to spacing. These points are linked to basic factual recall. And then obviously, as you can see up here, this is more complex. How did the Nazi Party control the lives of young people? You know, this is, you know, what year was something passed? And that's obviously requires a much more sophisticated answer. It's low stakes. If you want to make it no stakes, just remove the points. Now, there's a few ways you could do this. This could be a whole lesson. At the end of perhaps, say you've done Nazi methods of control, and have this. And I think teachers are a little bit scared to use retrieval practice for a whole lesson, especially in our subject. We've got so much content to cover. But I have really thought carefully as a teacher and a middle leader and about how often I use retrieval practice. And what I used to do was plow through content, and so that we would finish and would say, right, we've got weeks now to revise before you leave for study leave. And all that is promoting is crammed retrieval practice. It's not modelling spaced retrieval practice throughout the curriculum, throughout the course and the 2 years. So I will dedicate a lesson to it. Because if you were to just dedicate 10 minutes of a starter activity to this type of task, I don't think you're doing it justice. However, if you want this to be a starter activity, this is how I would do it. I would just say, right, for the start of this lesson, you've got 10 minutes to do the first 2 or the first 4. And there you go, it's do now task, answer those first 4, and then, you know, give them 5 minutes and then have 5 minutes to do the feedback and reflection and talk through the answers, and they self-check. And then they say, right, next lesson, we're going to do this. And it's our scaffolding approach where you've built up to it. And even if you showed them this whole pyramid, you could just have it as a slide and just show these, and then next lesson include the second layer, or you could show it them and then say, right, you know, in a few lessons time, you will be answering this question. And it's not cheating. They will still have to recall that information from memory, but what will happen is there'll be some students who will prepare for that. And that's an indirect benefit of retrieval practice. When you use retrieval practice a lot in your lessons, students know that they're going to get quizzed a lot and tested, that they can prepare for that. And actually, we really want them to be doing that. We want them to use that initiative. This can also be done as a ladder, working your way up the ladder. But I shared this on Twitter. English have adapted it really well. I'd love to see some more history examples. So I'm going to talk to you about how I went from free recall to cued recall. So I used to do a little bit like Ashley. I used to stick a portrait of Henry VIII up and say, write down what you can remember about Henry VIII. Now, I teach the Tudors in year 8. I teach at A level. My A-level students, if I did do that, they would actually do a really good job of it, and they would write a sophisticated answer. My year 8s were, year after year, it would be the same thing. They would describe him and say Henry VIII was fat and he had 6 wives. And I was just gutted, really, because I had told them so much more than that. But it's my fault in a way for not giving year 8 the guidance they needed. I said, just write down what you can remember about Henry VIII, and they needed more specific structure. And that's how I ended up creating this picture prompt activity. And it was with the same class. I did the portrait, their answers I was disappointed with. Then I created that activity. And I know Hugh's going to talk about don't just stick an icon on, and he's absolutely right. But this did work really well. And I say it worked well. The quality of their answers were much better because they still had to retrieve information, but here they were just writing he was fat and he had 6 wives, divorced, beheaded, died. And I thought, what about the Reformation, the break with Rome, the dissolution of the monasteries? And here they were writing about that because of the Pope, because of the money, because of the Church of England. That was just enough of that prompt. So as the research said, that younger students need that guidance, that scaffolding, I completely found that to be true. And I was really, really impressed with the quality of their answers. So what I'm going to do now is take a topic that probably all of us teach at some point, the Treaty of Versailles, and just show you some different ways that you could do the different types of retrieval for this topic. So again, the picture prompt, because you could potentially say, write down everything you can recall about the Treaty of Versailles. But what if you want the students to recall specific terms of the treaty or reaction? What if you want them to, it's about thinking, what do you want students to retrieve? And these icons will just give that much of a prompt, and the same here. Just a picture prompt, a cue, if they need a little bit more structure or guidance, depending on when you studied the Treaty of Versailles. I found this really interesting. There's a little retrieval experiment. I teach year 10 and year 11, and I did some retrieval tasks on the Treaty of Versailles with year 10, not long after, waited a short while, but only a few weeks. And I also did some retrieval tasks with year 11, who obviously they'd studied that a year ago. And with my year 10s, it was more fresh in their mind, and their answers were better. I did a free recall task for year 11, and then the following week I gave them a little bit of a prompt, and their answers improved. Now, you don't have to use an icon and image. I love this activity. And I've adapted it slightly. When I first created, sorry, I love my own ideas. Oh, that's so embarrassing. But when I first created this, it wasn't for retrieval purposes. It was because I was trying to encourage students to use subject-specific vocabulary, tier 3 terms in their answers. I've adapted this slightly now. You could use this as a consolidation task or retrieval. The difference would be when you use it and whether they're allowed to use notes or not. Now, this is an activity that has support and challenge for all. Years ago, I probably would have done a bronze and a silver and a gold worksheet, and it would have just been insane. Workload for me would have been really limiting to the bronze. They wouldn't have had the opportunity, but this is challenge for all. So what I always include in my bronze are words that everyone can include. And I think people think, oh, why are you making it so easy? And I deliberately do that. So everyone has a taste of success and a boost of confidence. Write about the Treaty of Versailles, one of the words is Versailles, tick. That's easy to do. However, I am providing challenge with these terms. You have to obviously know what the reparations have got to do with the Treaty of Versailles to be able to include that terminology. And again, I found answers were of a better quality because they just had this guidance, but they still obviously have to retrieve the information from memory. So the go for gold is a really good activity for history. And then this is again, Treaty of Versailles. I quite like this when trying to talk to the students about what are the essentials, because we might sometimes in lessons go off on a little bit of a tangent, tell a funny story or an interesting, quirky story. I do that a lot, especially if I've watched a documentary or I've read a book, or I've traveled to a lot of places where I've learned a lot of history, and I end up telling the students these stories, and I want to do that just to add sort of a richness and to make it even more interesting. But the problem can be is that the students will remember that information, and actually I want them to really remember the essentials. So it's worth having this conversation about who are the key individuals, what are the key words, what are the key features, what are the key dates, especially with with monarchs. Like I said, what was, when they say, Miss, what was Henry VIII's birthday? Well, I actually know that because I've been asked it so many times. I think it's 28th of January. But anyway, but that's not really a key date, is it, that we want students to remember? So this is really useful as well, to have this conversation and the focus, and I've just put a key there to just keep coming back to the significance and the essentials. And I've only just created this resource the other day. So it's in my book that'll be coming out next month. And again, this is to just elaborate and extend, to have a little bit of a prompt. Very basic facts. I haven't actually used this activity. I've just made this one for today. I actually used it with Year 8. And again, it was with Henry VIII. And I just provided a fact, but they had to build on it and elaborate and extend and develop it from their own knowledge for using retrieval. And I really liked it. It worked well with my students. Very simple. All of these, somebody did ask me for a template, and I don't mind sharing, but at the same time, it's literally just boxes, isn't it? It's low effort, high impact. It really, didn't take me long to sort of knock up this. But the answers, and I did tweet out an answer the other day, the answers from the students were good. So that's what we want, low effort for the teacher. We did used to spend hours on sorting cards, cutting and gluing and laminating. Because this took me not long to create, but it had a high impact because it challenged the students and it was able to get them to elaborate and stretch and extend. This is the brain dump, the free recall. Again, this is a really interesting one as well. I find the quality of answers really does depend on at what point in the course you're giving it to students. If it's not long after, then probably can recall quite a lot. If it's too long, then they might struggle with it. And again, you have to be very specific. I put here Treaty of Versailles, but I could have made this more precise. I could have been about, it could have been, again, the terms, the reaction, the big three. So I think a brain dump, whilst we know it's the most effective because it's the most challenging, it can sort of go one way or the other in history. Students can sort of go off on a tangent and write about not relevant things or not the things we want them to. So we've just got to be careful how we phrase it and when we do that. I love this. This is not my idea. This is from Teach.blog blog on Twitter. Now, the idea of this, it doesn't have to be retrieval. Again, if it's no notes, it's from memory, it's retrieval. If you're doing it in a lesson to consolidate, that's absolutely fine. And the idea is spend 5 minutes on it. This could be great for revision. It could be a revision lesson. You might even do it over a series of lessons. Right, starter activity today. The do now task is 5 minutes on this section. We're going to have 5 minutes, write about that, and now we're going to have 5 minutes, let's discuss what we included. And then there we go. So there's lots of different ways how we can take these resources. This is my challenge grid that I mentioned, and this is promoting space practice. And I created this because what I was very guilty of is just sort of asking, what did we do last lesson? What can you remember from last lesson? And not asking about 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago or further back. Now, this, if you were to use a grid like that as a starter activity, there's far too many questions. If you want to just use it at the start of a lesson, I would just use 4. Yellow, blue, green and red, so you've still got the spacing elements of it. I had a planned absence, and I set a retrieval grid like that for my class. And they had, because actually if you look at some of the questions, 2 causes of hyperinflation, strengths and weaknesses, these are allowing opportunities for students to elaborate and write detailed answers. So by having time, rather than you've got 10 minutes, the quality of their answers can improve. And again, it's really important with these as well that we do make the time to discuss the answers so that they can identify gaps in knowledge. And what I tend to do when we go through the answers is I say, get a different coloured pen, and in the pen, they hear something that they didn't include, they can add that to show I didn't retrieve that, but I've added that. Or they can self-correct and just develop their answers. This has been really popular in history. It has had over 100,000 downloads. And I think, again, it just comes down to the simplicity of the task. The hardest thing about this is the questions and question design. And even when I first did it, thinking, oh, what did we do 2 weeks ago? And I had to look back at my planner because I forgot. So now moving on to technology, I'm very aware of the time. We might not have much time for questions and answers, but I am available on Twitter and I can hang around. These are my 3 golden rules. Keep it low stakes, so it's not stressful. Workload friendly for you as a teacher. Take other people's quizzes, find them on market. And then the last one is the most important one, user-friendly. Someone recommended a website to me and I went on it. I just couldn't figure it out. I couldn't even set up an account properly. And I'm quite capable with technology, but it was very complex. And I thought, right, if I can't figure this out, there's plenty of quizzing tools out there that I can use. So I'm just going to bin it off. That's what I said to myself. So these are the digital tools that I do use. These are my favorites. Quizzes is my absolute favorite. Carousel Learn is a digital model of Adam Boxer's Retrieval Roulette, which is really, really popular. And lots of teachers are uploading their resources. Mentimeter is no stakes. Students don't even put their names on. As much as I love quizzes, remember what I said about vary the diet and lots of variety. I won't use quizzes every lesson. Imagine in a secondary school and they're going Kahoot, Kahoot, Kahoot every lesson. So it is quite nice. And there's different features with different quizzes. For example, you could use flashcards on Quizlet, multiple choice questions, polls, Jamboard's great as well. I put this on Twitter and then teachers said, oh, what about these? And then these are some other recommendations. I've used Flipgrid, I've used Plickers, but some of them I haven't used, but lots of people in the history community like Socrative and Anki flashcards are brilliant as well. As I said, I wasn't making time for feedback and reflection, so I created this ticket on a Google Doc. After we went through the answers, I made students make a note of where they were able to recall information confidently and quickly and correctly, and where the gaps in their knowledge were. So then that puts the onus on them. You know where the gaps are, what are you going to do about it? And as I went through, I skimmed through all of these, and I remember that the risings was on pretty much everyone's gaps in knowledge. So I thought, okay, I need to go over that again. So that was really useful for me as a teacher. So common mistakes with retrieval practice. A school I worked with in Northern Ireland asked me, what are the most common mistakes? And then the more I started thinking about it, I wrote a whole chapter in my new book about it. And a lot of them were based on my own. So this I've mentioned a lot, not having the time for feedback and reflection, only using it as a starter activity, so powerful that if we just limit it to 8 minutes or something like that, we're maybe not getting the most of it. And then not getting the level of challenge just right, like those multiple choice questions, they were just ridiculous, weren't they, some of them? So not too easy, not too hard, but desirably difficult, or as Goldilocks would say, just right. And thinking that there isn't time for retrieval practice, especially as you go back to school, you think, nope, haven't got time. It's quite blunt when I say this, but I do say just find time. It's so effective. We have to just adapt and make time for it. And vary the diet, the different tasks that you do, the different types of questions, mix it up. And I won't go into this too much, but and Hugh wrote about this in my book, and I totally agreed with him. We need to look at cognitive science in our subject. We're very different to maths, and interleaving works really well in maths. But we have a curriculum based on chronology, and it doesn't lend itself as well to history as it would maths. And that's okay. We don't have to use interleaving. If we, as teachers and experts, don't think it's appropriate, then that's what it's about, embracing cognitive science and applying it in our context. And I created this model, building on the work of Shulman, Mishra and Kohler, saying as teachers, we've got to have strong confidence knowledge in all of these areas. Pedagogy, technology, we've all had to upskill in recent months, our subject knowledge, but also how students learn, which is actually why today is so brilliant. We're doing an online event via technology. I'm sharing apps. We're talking about pedagogy. It's got a history theme and content running through it. And it's a cognitive science event. We are all there in that sweet spot in the middle. So it's brilliant. So just to end, my 5 top tips: low effort for you, for the teacher, high impact for the student. Make retrieval a regular part of your classroom routine. Keep it low stakes. There is a time and a place for formal high stakes assessment, but that's not retrieval practice. Make sure feedback is provided, not just here's your answers or your quiz, let's move on. Make time for it. And again, I think this is what I want my most important message to be, and it's something that I need to do more of. Work together with the history community on task and question design, probably more so question design. Ask and look what's out there, get feedback, share. I need to start doing this. I'll start sharing more of my quizzes. It can feel a little bit vulnerable putting yourself out there, but as long as we're kind and collaborative, then we will progress together. So that's it, right? Brilliant, 47 minutes. Thank you very much. I'm on Twitter, social media. I've blogged a lot. I've written a lot about retrieval practice. Hugh Richards is in my second book. That's a really good case study. I also write in the last chapter about retrieval practice in history. And then in the resource guide, I've got Simon Beale, Rachel Ball, and lots of my history examples. And that's out next month. Sorry for the plug, but I just thought it was quite apt. So is that okay? Scott, are you there? And Tom?
Hi.
We're here. Hiya. We're all here. Oh, it's like the gang back together again.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you so much for that. That was absolutely rip roaring. It was an absolute stonker. Like literally, like my phone, it's lit with all the notifications about how useful the strategies are and the different ideas that you've given, both the kind of the classics like your retrieval grid, which I think I just use all the time, and can I say work really well in a digital kind of remote learning context as well, but also your new ones that you were sharing that come in your new book as well. Ooh, can you see how the weather's changing in Newcastle from miserable to even more miserable?
Snowing over here.
But honestly, that's incredible, and for you to give up your time really does mean a lot, because we know that you're an incredibly busy lady, and it really does mean a lot that you've given us 47 minutes of your time.
Sorry, I was like, no, I'm trying to rush through it.
Sorry, go for it.
No, I was just saying, I think it's so great that you've done this. I love the TM History Icons team, but this is the next step. I think you're leading the way, and I did say to Tom the other day that I think that they should do this for the other subjects now, like retrieval, dual coding, and PE and maths. Because as I just said about interleaving, it's different in maths. Do you remember in the first TM History Icons, I said we created this event because we didn't like listening to science teachers? So I just bring that up.
Hey, you of all people know that what happens at Icons stays at Icons.
True.
Prepare for falling from the science community.
No, I love listening to science teachers, really. I don't know, I do.
Right.
Because I think, you know, we for a while there's been this kind of like situation where we might have looked at things as subject specific, and we might have looked at things in terms of pedagogy, and actually subject pedagogical practice is absolutely key. So how we model deconstructing sources might be different from how they model kind of deconstructing something in English. There might be commonality, but there's also intricacies like scholarship that we will kind of like weave in as well. And I think you're absolutely right that in terms of some forms of retrieval lend themselves quite well to kind of maths, but perhaps in history, and it's about kind of having that subject knowledge expertise to know what works and when. And as much as we see these wider community things going on, knowing how that translates within your own kind of context and making it work for the children and yourself, I think is key. So I'm going to say it one more time because it makes me sound dead professional. Subject pedagogical practice. So Tom's laughing because he's never heard me say such long words.
It's always with that accent, mate.
Subject pedagogical practice. It's normally got a swear in there as well. So. Thank you so much. So, we've got a couple of minutes for some questions, so I'm just going to scan the chat because I know that I saw a couple of questions which came up there for you. I mean, once we wade through the praise, which is like scrolling through yellow pages. So what we've got here is in terms of feedback with retrieval practice. So we've got Dom WD1. What is a good way to give feedback to retrieval practice?
Sorry, the internet it's not great. Was it what's a good way to give feedback with retrieval practice? Was that the question?
To retrieval practice.
Oh, sorry. I'm
it's on screen.
Sorry.
It's on screen.
Yeah, I can.
There we go. I found it now, so you can see it.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you. Sorry. It completely depends, obviously, but I did contact Michael Childs about this because he did his feedback pendulum book, and the feedback debate is should it be immediate or delayed? And we both agreed actually with retrieval practice, immediate, because a massive part of retrieval practice is identifying gaps in knowledge. But if you're doing a free recall task where you're asking students to write a paragraph about something, obviously that might not be as immediate. But most of the online quizzing tools would just give you that immediate feedback. Even if you just have a discussion, even if students have, so with something like quizzes, it's there in red and green, where the students got questions right or wrong, then it has all these analysis for you. And even if you just pick up on, okay, actually quite a few people got this one wrong, let's just have a little chat about that now. And I think it's just little things like that that we just would be like, right, we've done retrieval, let's move on. And I think we're really missing a trick by not having that feedback and or reflection. But my reflection ticket that I just shared, that can be, even if students have self-corrected or they've done a multiple choice quiz, it's getting them actually to consciously aware, because sometimes when they do a quiz, they might just look at the number. I got 13 out of 15 right, and they didn't look where they went wrong, and they need to. So I think it's just having that awareness of feedback and just trying to just make an effort, some sort of effort, but it does depend on the retrieval task, what type of feedback you give.
You're absolutely right. And it's about that metacognitive practice. And it's about kind of not being like a magician with a rabbit out of a hat, kind of like that we're doing retrieval and the kids don't understand why, because the more that we communicate the purpose of it, the more that they'll then kind of buy into that and kind of themselves as part of self-quizzing. So less of this kind of magician kind of keeping the secrets, instead actually get them kind of involved in it. You're absolutely right in terms of it's no use just doing the retrieval and then moving on. It's got to be something which connects to the learning of the lesson, and that it's retrieved and applied, because otherwise it's pub quiz knowledge. Any kid can challenge 1066, but can they actually apply that to then a source activity afterwards?
I can't even do the first bit, to be honest, most of the time. I can't even do the simple pub quiz questions and get them right.
Get changed as today's proven, so you know.
But I think our subject is probably really vulnerable to that, isn't it? Because of the dates. Yeah, because apparently like 1066 is the most common PIN number for a bank account, because lots of it is. Not my PIN number, but it's because adults remember 1066. But then, you know, if I say to me, what do you remember about 1066? Oh, you know, not much. So it's about going, beyond that, like you said, Alex, that pub quiz trivia.
Yeah. Pub quiz knowledge, let's get rid of that. I mean, not that pub quiz knowledge isn't great, and who else as a history teacher absolutely bricks it when it comes to the history round in a pub quiz, and everyone expects you to know every single fact in history, and you're like, hang on, I'm a 20th century.
Scott also does. He's ran up. I don't know why Scott gone off screen. Why is he
I'm the one. I'm just doing the clicking, mate. That's all I'm doing. You're absolutely right about it's depth of knowledge rather than breadth of knowledge, isn't it? It's something that I think that you find, I think, as an international teacher as well, because you're trying to pull lots and lots of things in. It's like how much you're trying to cover and in how much depth. And that's a fundamental question that everyone's got to grapple with in their own context initially. But yeah, if you're only ever going for the surface, then kind of what's the point, I think.
Yeah, and I think also as well, you know, due to lockdown, we've had what I would call like an industrial revolution, if you like, in terms of retrieval online. And there's so much now that we can harness in terms of retrieval. So how it is that you can arrive to a lesson knowing what those misconceptions are from a retrieval quiz that they've done as homework or something like that. So you're ready to go in there and like absolutely myth bust at the start and then continue that retrieval practice through things like PLCs. So I think, you know, we have had that revolutionary moment. So I wish I could trademark industrial revolution, but apparently it's a real thing. But yeah, we had an industrial revolution in retrieval. So I'll just scan again.
How long have you spent coming up with that? How long did you spend thinking up an industrial revolution? I bet you spent all night thinking about that.
Retrieval revolution. I love that. That's my next book, Alex. Retrieval revolution.
Yes, there you go. Yes, that yeah, I can't wait to have that. Right, okay. So I'm just scanning any more. How can you ensure retrieval practice? No, we've had that one, takes over the whole lesson. It's just a shed load of praise, if I'm honest, Kate. But I have no doubt that if you go onto your Twitter, which I've no doubt has like a gazillion notifications a day anyway, but and absolutely no doubt that on there the conversation will absolutely continue, and you know you'll be a busy gal today.
I think the Bjork tweeted you. I think the Bjorks put a tweet out.
Yeah, they're not on Twitter, Tom, because I would know that. I would follow them. But I did see, the only tweet I saw was there's nothing wrong being obsessed with the Bjorks from Ashley. And it just was like, oh, yeah. You need to get them on the next TMHistoryIcons, honestly. They're keynotes.
Well, thank you so much, Kate. And thank you for your positivity. It's always wonderful to have you involved.
Thanks for asking me. I really enjoyed it. So I'll just leave now, yeah?
Like that. I've got the power, mate. I can just leave you there and there's nothing you can do about it. Seriously, Kate, it's lovely to see you. Thanks ever so much for sharing your experiences and your wisdom. It means a lot.
Oh, that means a lot from you, Scott, so thank you.
Bye,
Take
Kate.
care.
Thank you.
Right, that was good, wasn't it?
That was a bit all right.
All right.
I think I'm going to, because of my tech failures earlier, we actually missed the time travel video, didn't we? So
yeah,
that's right.
Before we go on to that, can I just do a little kind of so we've mentioned a lot today about the how-tos in which is a phenomenal kind of website of how-tos, but can I just say Tom Patterson is also co-person of that. So big shout out to Tom Patterson.
Who's that?
Retweet from us.
Yeah, Tom, absolutely. That platform is there. Loads of people putting brilliant stuff on it, but that wouldn't be happening without Tom. So he definitely needs that shout out. I think that is fair.
Correction done. Yes.
Good. Right. So I know we missed the video earlier because I trashed it with my tech, but time travel actually as a company started supporting us in they were the first ever company to sponsor any Teach Me Icons event in 2015. This was before we'd even set up an event. They said, we'll sponsor you. So, I mean, that means a lot to me on a personal level that Nick kind of put a lot of faith and trust and investment into this idea. And he has remained completely committed to it for the last 6 years now. So, so with that in mind, here's a little bit about what time travel do. Now, bear in mind that they're currently running VR. So during this kind of lockdown era, you can still bring them into school to do virtual reality stuff with your students, and it's really impressive stuff. So I'll pass over to Scott.
Hello, my name's Sergeant Parsons. I'm absolutely delighted to have the opportunity to speak to you about the workshops which time travel education can offer to your school. I travelled from 1917 to 2021, and with me on my journey to your school, I will fetch with me accurate working props, historical artifacts from all fighting armies, which can be safely demonstrated to your pupils. We boast ourselves on owning a large medical collection which can enhance any medical presentations, workshops which we're conducting. Things such as the Thomas Splint can be brought to the school and demonstrated. We should also fetch with us some 21st century technology in the form of virtual reality headsets. 30 virtual reality headsets in order to immerse the pupils in the topic. Now, the invisible enemy we faced in 1917 was that of gas. However, in the 21st century, the invisible enemy is obviously COVID. We have strict guidelines and procedures which are adhered to at all times in order to provide a safe presentation environment. We cater for all year groups, all ages, and for all learning objectives that your school may have. All you need to do now is simply go to www.timetraveleducation.co.uk. Thank you.
Love it. Love it. Sergeant Parsons, he's a TM history legend, isn't he, Lammy?
Whatever you do, don't ever become a movie critic. Love it. Love it.
True that, I do love it.
They are, and it's not an event without Sergeant Parsons being there. They're absolutely incredible, and I can't wait until we can actually go on trips again so that we can go abroad with them. And their VR headsets are amazing. Me and Alice had a wonderful time at the last event where I was just like immersed into another world. So really do give them a look up because they are amazing. And just imagine what it'd be like if you have Sergeant Parsons walk into your classroom with his Thomas Splint. Hopefully not Thomas Rogers.
I think Scott's going to take me off in a second. I hope he is. No,
yes,
that's absolutely fine.
Run a little bit, but you know, it's it is what it is when you've got a rip roaring show like this. We can't stop mid-flow. So we were going to have a break 11:45 till 12:05. So the break is still going to be finishing at 12:05, so that the lovely Hugh Richards can get going at 12:10. So you've got 9 minutes to get a brew, get a biscuit. Saturday afternoon bev, I don't know. That would be the Icons way to go for it. But more importantly, get your tweets out to us of you taking part in the event, because we've got a competition for a £10 Amazon voucher. Make sure that you're including hashtag and TMHI. And also, just before we go to a break, can we also do another shout out for Carmel Bones in terms of raising money for the Samaritans in memory of David Bones. 50% of the money raised today will go to the Samaritans, and our thoughts are very much with Carmel and her family. We hope that you have a restful now 8 minutes break, and we look forward to seeing you with a brew on Twitter soon.
Welcome back, everybody, to some TM History Icons Cogsci action. We've seen two absolutely fantastic presentations so far from Ashley and from Kate Jones. Thank you so much to them for inspiring everybody so much with their Cogsci legendary knowledge. It's been absolutely fantastic. What I'm going to do now is just introduce the second video from our second sponsor today, which is Welby. Welby, if you're looking to reduce workload in your school, then absolutely check them out. Through a mixture of surveying tools and other digital processes, they can support your school to do that really, really well. So here's the second video. Thanks.
Welby is a systemised solution which helps improve staff well-being and build it into your school culture. You can see where you are now and plan where you want to be. Using the evidence-based survey, the Health and Safety Executives Indicator tool, you can see your staff members' scores in your online dashboard. This shares a full report including analysis, benchmarks and heat maps. Use our suggested priority actions, which means it's much easier and faster to take positive steps. Staff also share their comments, providing further insight into actions needed, and you're able to respond to them anonymously, creating greater engagement. Welby allows you to easily share your results with staff and governors using a PowerPoint presentation which you can easily download. You can book a results review call with a wellbeing expert and let us help you set the right goals and actions to achieve the outcomes you need. With Welby Voice, you can follow up on post-survey actions and track progress over the next 12 months. You can also use it for anything else, where staff anonymity will help. For example, with consultations or following a change. Send staff members a message, ask a question or seek feedback. It's as easy as sending an email. The one difference being, it is an anonymous conversation. You can invite all staff to take part or groups as little as 8. This means that you only need to invite relevant staff, such as those affected by the changes you've made. This might be teachers, support staff, middle leaders, teaching assistants, or any group of staff in your school. You choose the titles you use. Staff receive their invitation by email, click on the button to respond through a web page, only they see and are able to send you their feedback. You see this in your school dashboard, where you can read and choose to respond if you wish. You can set up multiple users across your leadership team to share workload and enable others to seek feedback from their team. It really is that easy. Our online user guides make sure Welby Survey and Voice are quick and easy to use. Our online toolkit will help accelerate your progress and ensure you reach the outcomes you need. The available resources are targeted at those areas we know will build your foundations and have the biggest impact on staff well-being, and include a staff well-being policy and strategy template, 12 competencies proven to prevent and reduce staff stress, and the ability to self-assess against these through 4 online questionnaires. This means that all your leaders will have a high awareness of those behaviours that will make well-being simply part of your everyday culture. Online training in 5 of the key behaviours that will make the biggest difference in your school. Add 12 months of ongoing remote support through email, phone or video call, and systemize how you improve the well-being and performance of your staff. Start today and register for your account, or book a full demonstration.
Thanks to Mark, and Mark Solomons, who's the director of Welby, again has chosen to support us and support TM History Icons and Teach Me Icons, in fact, because they sponsor all our events. So thank you to them. I'm going to pass over to Alex now.
Hi Hi everyone. So we hope that you had a good break and managed to get a brew, or it seems to be that Diet Coke is the thing that we're all drinking today. I don't know if it's like some secret fuel for teachers, but we will be seeking sponsorship. So thank you very much to Wellbe there. So we've got our final speaker for today, and this is Hugh Richards. And Hugh Richards is going to be looking at dual coding because he's done a lot of work with Ollie Cav. Hugh is Hod History at Huntington York. They're obviously a school, but they're also a research school as well. So very much kind of clued into their kind of Cogsci research. He's also part of the Chartered College. He's on the History Association Secondary Committee, and he's also leading the Subject Leader Programme with them as well. So basically, he knows his stuff. Like he knows his stuff. So we're very excited to have Hugh with us today. And I'll raise a Saturday afternoon bev to you, Hugh, with a bit of Diet Coke, because I see that you're drinking it as well. Oh no! Yes. Excellent. So without further ado, Hugh's going to take it away with dual coding, which is something which, you know, we've all kind of seen kind of evolve and grow over the past couple of years in terms of kind of interest. And he's going to take us through kind of the effective ways that we can do it, kind of myths to kind of like bust, and kind of misconceptions to kind of dispel, and then take us through the kind of really effective practice that we can put into place within a history context. So take it away, Hugh.
I'm just going to do that really annoying thing again, though, because I know that Hugh's got his screen all ready to go for the presentation. But Hugh, could you just unmute yourself at the moment? Because you're just muted underneath the screen that I'm about to share out. And we're back. Wonderful stuff. Thank you very much. It's over to you.
Thanks. So I'm going to talk today about using dual coding to help us teach history. And it's a bit of a clunky title, but actually I think it's exactly what I mean. Because we're here because we want to get better at teaching, right? And we want to understand how cognitive science can help us achieve that aim, right? And that's brilliant. But the problem we've got is we need to focus on what we want to teach. So what are we wanting to do with these insights from cognitive science? Well, what we're trying to do is teach history, okay? And we want to help our students explore and understand and make meaning from the past. And we are, perhaps in the words of Christian Council, trying to change our pupils, trying to give them new power. And we might look to equip our students with all kinds of deeper understanding of the world as it was, so that they have a deeper understanding of the world as it is. And that's an amazing thing to be doing. And we've got to make sure that we keep history at the heart of it, right? We've definitely got a responsibility to get them the best grades they can. We want them to remember as much as we can, get them to remember. But actually, you know, we've got to make sure that we're teaching really good history, even on those wet Thursday afternoons, right? So everything we've got to do, it's got to be driven by the history and leading us to teach better history, right? So that's why I'm kind of going with this title. So we cannot, you know, we're not short on ambition. We're far more often short on time. So we do need to try and make sure that the techniques we're using are efficient, and we do need to try and make sure that the techniques we're using are going to have an impact. We can't simply reteach it till we get it. Graham Nuttall's had a couple of shout outs already today, but his book, The Hidden Lives of Learners, is really, really useful for understanding the learning process and what is required to make something stick in the long-term memory. So we can look to evidence and research and cognitive psychology for best bets, right? That's something we can really helpfully do. But we forget what we're teaching at our absolute peril, okay? The cognitive science has to come to us. It has to come to the history. And anything where the history starts to get warped or goes to meet the science, if you see what I mean, that's where things start to go wrong. And that's where things will start to stop making sense. And the effects that we're trying to have with cognitive psychology won't happen. Because what we're looking to do is we're trying to teach them history. And if we warp it too much in favor of cognitive science, then we start to lose that essence of what we're getting at. We have got really well-established traditions in our subject, and that's worth holding on to and treasuring and keeping, right? We can't just throw the baby out with the bathwater on this one. We have to make sure that we're using cognitive science and any new things intelligently and carefully. We have to be really clear-headed with it, right? So new ideas have to be brought in really, really carefully. And how can they add to what we already have? here I've got 3 images here of Fountains Abbey, which is our GCSE site study. And we go back every year, and it's absolutely brilliant. We're complete experts in it. I went there last Wednesday to record a virtual talk because our year 10s won't be able to visit the site this year. But it was amazing to go back there and like, unpick the ruins again, ready to teach them in the classroom. And it dawned on me at that point that this is the most incredible dual coding, right? To take them on an Abbey site tour, I realised how much they were going to miss from not being able to go this year, because I'm going to create the best interactive tour I possibly can using all kinds of tech, but they are going to miss the feeling of being there, coupled with their appreciation of the scale of the place and the magic and the mystery of the place and the intrigue of the place. They're going to miss all of that stuff, which I simply can't recreate in the classroom. So I can give them one side of it. I can give them the kind of audio track, and I can give them a little bit of that experience, but they're not going to get it in the same way. And so I want us to really think carefully about keeping the authentic history at the driving force of everything we do. And so it is with dual coding, right? One of the key things I advise people to do is to look to solve defined problems, okay? A really important principle is that if it's not a problem, don't try and solve it. So if there's something is working with your history teaching, fantastic, keep doing it. You don't have to adopt, as Kate was saying earlier, we don't have to just blanket adopt cognitive psychology to make our history teaching better, because sometimes it won't. The interleaving example that Kate was talking about doesn't work for us in history. So we just need to ignore it. We need to park it to one side and go confidently, as professionals, as experts in our subject, we have to go, that's not for us, right? That just isn't for us. And we have to be really careful here about, are we problem solving, or are we trying to just apply a blanket thing to things where there aren't a problem? And if you're applying a blanket, you're not only creating work for yourself that doesn't need to be created, but you're also potentially endangering what's already working. And you might end up with a situation that works worse than what you had before. So we have to be really careful, professional, reflective experts on this. Right? Teaching inquiry questions, for example, has been massively well documented in history over time. I work at a research school. We've been doing metacognition and cognitive psychology for 5-6 years now. We're one of the first research schools in the country, one of the first 5 in the country. And there's lots of stuff I ignore, right? I mean, there's lots of stuff where I go, this isn't going to work in history. Oh no, that's going to endanger our inquiry questions, and inquiry questions are just too good to ignore, right? So there are times when I just park stuff and go, I don't want to use it. We did some amazing work on vocabulary, however, 2 years ago. Brilliant. That's hugely important. You know, we teach about the past. It's kind of like a different country. They kind of speak a different language. So getting some of that vocabulary in there is really powerful. I had a problem with students using like time-specific vocabulary. Okay, let's see what we can get in there from cognitive psychology and research evidence. Brilliant. But some stuff I definitely ignore, and you have to have that confidence to do the same thing. Okay, as subject leads, as history specialists, whatever, you have to have that confidence. Okay, we have to make sure that where there are areas of our practice that don't work as well, we can then start to fix them with cognitive psychology. We can start to look to research evidence to go, oh, actually, this isn't working. I wonder what's out there in terms of fixing this for me. Okay. So in a bit, I'm going to explain to you a few history teacher problems that dual coding has helped me solve. But I want to start with a quick explanation of what dual coding actually is, because I think this has got lost. Now, this is absolutely the best book to go to on dual coding with teachers. It's superb. Oliver Caviglioli came to Huntington and worked with the history department in 2019 before everything kicked off. And it was a really helpful process. And we talked a lot about dual coding and what it meant in history and how we can make meaning from the past. Now, if you want the theory, this book's the place to go. Right? I'm not going to give you the huge theory now because I don't have the time, but also it's generic. It's not history. And what you want from me right now is applying it to history. But let's give you the kind of sketch out version of this. Okay, here's a brief explanation. So the dual coding theory works on the basis that you have 2 streams of information going into your head. And what Kate was talking about earlier about working memory having a really limited capacity, and long-term memory having an almost infinite capacity. Well, dual coding suggests that you can actually use these two inputs, these 2 stimuli pathways simultaneously to create a really strong encoding effect into the long-term memory. So you've got what Oliver Caviglioli calls an auditory loop, which is things coming into your ear. It's things coming in that you might be reading in a sort of linear sequence, I suppose, and you've got a visuospatial sketchpad, and that you can appreciate all at once. in a single snapshot glance. That's what we're looking at today. And I want us to be really clear about that simultaneous effect that I'm looking to generate. Okay, now what Oliver Coviglioli calls it is synchronous processing. So it says we've got sequential processing coming in as I'm speaking to you. It's in a sequence. This image is appearing in your eyes all at once, and so you can synchronously process the whole thing. And that, I think, is one of the real problems with dual coding at the moment that we have to fix. Because otherwise, this isn't going to have the effect people are hoping it will. Okay, what we need to do is get this idea of a synchronous processing thing going on, and I'm going to be banging on about that for the rest of this session today. So bear with me on this. It's this element of when it's coming in through your eyes, the information is coming in through your eyes, through the visual stimuli pathway. Actually, it needs to have a synchronous meaning. If it doesn't, we're in trouble. Now, before I go any further, I do want to show you how this is not something that's new, right? This is an amazing textbook from 1973. And just at that snapshot of the Industrial Revolution, you can see technological progression. You can see it in the spinning wheel all the way up to the kind of modern spinning machines, right? You can see it in the Great Western paddle steamer up to the Queen Mary, right? You get that snapshot. I could then describe to you those changes, but you get that snapshot. You get that simultaneously straight away. And history teachers have been using this forever, right? This is not new. This, in some respects, is a wheel that has already been invented. You know, we've been using maps and charts and diagrams. It's a rite of passage, isn't it, to draw a Motte and Bailey castle or a cross-section of a trench or a diagram of trench warfare, right? We've been using these things forever. Incredibly rich imageries as well, not simply diagrams, but you get a sense of this. You get a sense of this castle as an internalized community, for example, as well as a military fortification. You get a sense of the global reach of the British Empire. You get a sense of carnage and chaos. And this is a good one because this one, the students can look at individual elements of it. We've all done that thing, haven't we? Oh, look, there's a cart pushing the horse pushing the cart, whatever, and there's the church is upside down. What does that mean? You can go through the different elements, but then you can step back and look at the whole thing as a whole. Okay, you can look at historical reconstructions, illustrations, right? Stephen Beastie's cutaways are unbelievably brilliant dual coding, right? This has happened. You get that simultaneous snapshot, but you can also explore room by room, space by space. You can talk about any number of different rich images in history. And if you use them in a particular way and you understand the effect they're talking about, then you can unlock the power of dual coding. So what I want to be really clear about here is that we've been doing it for ages. And all I think dual coding theory does for us here is it allows us to refine and improve that practice a little bit. Okay, if we're aware of the effect that we're trying to create, then we can do it a lot better. Okay, we can take full advantage of it, if you like. So I've got some misconceptions to deal with. The first one is dual coding is just combining images and words. I'm afraid it's not. If you just add images to things, it's not going to work as well as you think. If it doesn't have that clear visual meaning as a single image, then synchronously processed, then it's not really going to have that dual coded effect that you might be hoping for. Adding icons or images to worksheets will result in a dual coding effect. Often it won't. Okay. Generic forms of dual coding can be easily applied to history. Again, that's not always true. And this was something I spoke to extensively about with Oliver Coviglioli about I talked to him about, this is your style, isn't it? We've got the red and the black and we've got the icons. And a lot of people have kind of taken that superficial detail and gone, all right, so if I do it in this kind of stripped back way, it will work. But don't necessarily notice that what Coviglioli is doing is actually it's the framework, it's the organization of that information on a page that results in the dual coded effect. So I'll come back to that in a sec. Also, I can't draw, so I can't do it. That's also something I hear a lot and people talk to me about sometimes. But to the right is how I draw the British Isles. Okay, there it is. I draw it as triangles, basically. It doesn't have to be anything more complicated than that. That will give you the geographic locations you need. All right. You could tell the story of 1066 on that map. It's not pretty. Wales is too small. Cornwall is rightfully important and therefore at the centre of everything. But is there in the southwest probably a bit large? That's fine. You get a sense of the British Isles, don't you? You don't have to be beautiful, creating beautiful art. And I'll show you pretty much everything I'll show you today. There's going to be very little drawing involved. Okay. Here's an example of how I've done it badly in the past. This, I think, we see sort of, I've got this worksheet. It's a color coding activity. It's not that great. I still use it at GCSE at the moment, so this is something that I need to fix. I've I thought I was dual coding when I added these images. At best, I might be adding a little bit of a sense of period, but it's not going to give me any kind of snapshot. If I glance at this for 3 seconds, it's not going to tell me anything, right? It's not going to give me any extra information just by glancing at this. So this is what I talked to colleagues about this. One colleague who I have a huge amount of admiration and respect for describes this as decoration. What I've done here is I've decorated my worksheet, and that's pretty and helpful possibly, but it's decoration. We aren't going to have that dual coded effect that I'm hoping for. We might, as I say, have a slight impact on sense of period understanding, but there's no overall story, message, pattern, anything like that that's really going to help. Okay, so here's another example of that sort of thing going on. Now, what we've got here then is, I mean, I've tried to talk about Fountains Abbey here, and it started off as a split down domestic, religious, political, economic, social, and if I tell you that now, you can start to pick them out. I've added some icons. It's disorganized and chaotic. I've tried to show some overlap where the Abbey as employers fits into social and economic sides. I mean, again, I've broadly speaking done decoration, and it doesn't work as a snapshot. It doesn't work as a single issue, as a single synchronously processed image. That doesn't tell you much. If you glance at that, it's just chaos. So that hasn't worked, and I've got rid of that. So what am I trying to do next? Just before I talk to you about where to go forwards with this, then, this is an amazing blog. And if you make a note of this URL, just bit.ly/TMHistoryIcons this is a really helpful explanation, I suppose, of some of the common pitfalls of dual coding. I haven't quite got time to go into today, but might reassure you that it's not just me sort of getting grumpy about stuff. This is definitely issues that are happening across subject areas, across education. It's kind of warping and sort of mutating a little bit, and we've got to be careful to keep things focused on what the theory tells us. Okay, so here's 3 key principles, absolutely crucial principles. The first one is you've got to bring the cognitive science to the subject. You have to keep the history at the heart of it. The next thing is look to problem solve. Don't apply it as a blanket approach. Just go, what are my problems? How can I fix them? And can we make sure we're using both parts effectively? Can we check for the synchronous? That's what I really want to make sure. Can we check for the synchronous? If you do a 3-second test, does it make any sense? Does it add any information? If you glance at it for just 3 seconds, do you have that synchronous processing? And that's where I want to focus today a little bit. Obviously, you'll notice that there's going to be lots of history at the heart of it as well. So you're going to find lots of history examples. But this synchronous processing, that's what I want to get to the heart of now. Okay. I was going to take this slide out, but Kate told me I had to keep it in. I just love her expression. And there is an element of, you see people present like this and you go, right, well, that's all well and good, but what does it look like on that rainy Thursday afternoon that I talked about earlier? So let's put the history into it. Time and stories and narratives. That's got to be at the heart of what we do. Now, here's an example. And I know Tom really likes this one, so I kept it in for him. I've got a problem with students in Key Stage 3 conceptualizing time. How far is there between different events? And my solution here is to counting grannies. So if you imagine now a line of people standing behind you. They're all women. And there's about 25 years between each one because your matrilineal line is pretty carefully spaced out. Until the arrival of the contraceptive pill in the 1960s, the average age women gave birth was about 25. And so it's quite useful for us to get a sense of generational stacks up. And what's really fascinating is it gives us a really direct sort of connection to the people of the past. So we can start going, look, the First World War is the 4th granny back in your line behind you. The 4th woman back, she survives the first, or might not survive the First World War. We go back even further. The 14th, just the 14th granny back in your line would have heard the news of Charles being executed and would have reacted in one of 2 ways, probably. 36 grannies back would have dealt with the problems of the Norman conquest, right? She would have had this massive seismic change arrive. Now, this is assuming, of course, that granny is living in Britain, and there's absolutely no reason why that's the case. You know, your grandparent line could stretch across the world. Mine certainly does. So, actually, it isn't as straightforward as all of that. but you'll possibly find that it would weave its way back into British life at some point, or, I'm giving an example here. The 80th granny back probably had no idea that she lived at the same time as Jesus of Nazareth, right? That's just 80 grannies back in the line. And I think conceptualizing time in this way, I mean, historians are obsessed with time, and the better we can conceptualize time for key stage 3, the better they can start building a framework and hanging information on it. Okay, this one though, I calculated this when I was planning this session. It blows my mind. So I think of the Black Death as kind of peak medieval life. Yeah, we've got peasants in villages, we've got misery, we've got pain, we've got death, we've got powerful church, we've got kings, the works. And then I think of the Tudors as kind of early modern. We're getting new systems of government, religious reform. We start to see the printing press, the changes that we see echoing down into the modern world. There's 6 generations between the Black Death and the Tudor era. 6 grannies in a line between the Black Death. I mean, I can't get my head around that. But knowing that slightly shifts my understanding of the past and starts me to get me a better handle. And my students ask me how many grannies all the time. How many grannies is this then, sir? And it helps them slot things into place. So the next problem I had is breaking down continuous narrative at GCSE. This was my first effort at a timeline of our America course, and it is carnage. It is packed with information. It's got really confused visuals. There is a color code. The color code is irrelevant to the course. The text looks nice and like Wild Westy, but basically confuses the kids. The icons I've used don't even make sense. So, like, the Treaty of Grenville, 1795, has got the same icon as the Indian Removal Act, right? Fine, possibly. But to have that as the same icon as the Missouri Compromise or the Kansas-Nebraska Act, it doesn't really make sense at all, right? A treaty between 2 groups versus an act passed by Congress, different kind of thing. Okay, there's all kinds of problems with this. I mean, it was too small on the wall. Kids couldn't read it when I put it on the classroom wall. And there's also multiple narratives layered on top of each other with little distinction about the color code's an attempt to pick up on different stories, right? So the green one is the story of African Americans, and the orange one, the story of Native Americans, and chaos. The blue one is kind of the story of white Northern Americans. Chaos, and probably decoration. So I slimmed things down a little bit. I split it into 2. There was too much information I was trying to communicate at once. Split it into 2, simplify. I say simplify, I don't really mean simplify, I mean clarify. It doesn't bring simplicity, this timeline. In fact, it still contains a significant amount of complexity because it's one ongoing narrative. It's a continuous developing narrative. And the exam questions expect the kids to have distinct date ranges in their heads. That's a problem. There are chapters in the textbook, that's fine, but the story it doesn't break down into those time periods easily unless we help the kids conceptualize that. So this is the timeline I use at the start of each of my America lessons, and I have this little "we are here" thing that I put onto the timeline to help them locate themselves in the chronology. But I started to add containers, and this was a great piece of Ollie Cav advice, was, stick some containers on, break it up, and also bring the history into it still. So what is the nature of that phase? White Americans expand control, right? White Americans overrun the plains. War and violence, the cost of defeat. Now, the line continues through all of them. You can see it at the bottom there, breaking the containers. But the kids have got a sense of the phases of the story. And that brings them some analytical framework that they can then get into, okay? And they don't just think of these as brackets in the exam board exam question. They think of it as segments of the story. And therefore, we've brought the dual coding to the history. There are no icons on this. I've stripped the icons right out of the way. They don't help me explain the history, so they're gone. What there is a real clarity of story, I think. And as we go back to this timeline every single time, we are here. It's so much stronger. Okay, so here's another problem. My A-level students not grasping the core story in the middle of complex detail and wide-ranging interpretations. I throw loads at them at A-level, but sometimes they lose the core story. And so the living graph is a tried and tested thing that history teachers have done forever and a day. and just with a bit of dual coding now, dual coding thinking, we can start to improve our use of it, right? And this is how I see cognitive psychology fixing some problems in history. So it's a really, really well-established thing. I want you to imagine that my year 13s have spent a whole load of time, maybe in a homework, maybe for an hour, maybe a lesson and a homework, building a timeline of workers' rights over time between 1865 and 1992. They need this big, broad story, so that's what they've got. And it's covered in annotations. It's absolutely covered in it. I've made them draw this living graph. Things improving, getting worse. We've got the black line here for union rights, the blue line here for individual rights. By the way, this is all done on a classroom whiteboard, so there's no need to make complicated resources here. Your dual coding, my most common dual coding is with a whiteboard marker, right? And the drawings are hilariously terrible, but if I ever need to draw, but there's loads of ways I'm doing it where I'm not drawing, and actually we are making meaning from the past with a dual coded effect. So I want you to imagine this is covered in detail. The kids have done a really thorough job of it. It's absolutely packed with detail. What I then want to do is strip that out. I want to say, look, here's the story, right? And then I want us to focus on that story and then get a really good sense of it. So we can start adding language to it, right? We can start talking about heroic failure, earliest shoots. We can talk about noticeable uplifts. We can talk about upwards trajectories, gradual declines, high watermarks. We can start adding these little chunks, these little sort of grammatical chunks that we can then convert into essays. If they think about the high watermark and they can picture this image in their head, but they've got a really clear idea that union rights declines after World War II, whereas the individual rights are maintained, are sustained. We can make that really clear. We can talk about, again, there's a color code here, the rise and fall story of union rights and the build and maintain story of individual rights. It's simplified. There'll be people out there who teach this course and go, Richard, that is ludicrously simplified. But I've drawn this off the top of my head for the purpose of this presentation. We've done a lot of nuanced thinking before we start this process. So this is a process of clarification rather than simplification. It also is a process of trying to move them from a judgment to a written argument, but in their heads they can sort of summarize. And I see them do this in the exam paper. They'll draw these lines, just a tiny little sketch graph in the corner, and they'll put a few key dates on that line, and that's their schema, that's their chronological understanding really nailed on. So it's really exciting to see when you can see them doing the recall. It is also a really straightforward recall exercise. I draw this second diagram here and tell them to annotate it. Or I just give them the blank lines and say, annotate, create the lines and annotate that. You'll just have the axis and work from that. And it's really interesting how they do that. Like they'll often say things like, oh, I know it goes down after World War II, but I can't remember why. And they've got that sort of really clear chronological anchor points. Those chronological markers are in their heads. This is dual coding, folks. And there's not an icon in sight. And I'm slamming icons at TMHistoryIcons, which I find a little bit hilarious. But anyway, there's loads of good examples of this on Twitter. So good examples. Let's see what the good stuff looks like. This is a wonderful one from Danny Gorn, and his Twitter handle's in the bottom left there. You get the rise and fall, the boom and bust of the cattle industry. There it is. There's no mistaking the story there. And the kids then have this anchor point all the way through. Everything else is then located on this story. Is it part of the rise or the peak or the fall? Beautiful storytelling. Yeah, I mean, it's the red line here that matters, the big red line in the middle that tells the story. The icons are kind of helpful. Yeah, they're quite useful. And he's got he's using some key vocabulary in there, so you can see a monopoly board with the cattle barons, for example. And that conceptualizes a monopoly for the kids, really helpful perhaps. The fridge, right? Okay. There's stuff there that's going to be really helpful. But, and they'll add some annotations perhaps to this, but the rise and fall is the key story. That's what they need to know. And they've also got this dotted line right in the middle there around about 1880. So they know that there's a peak. Now they've got one date to remember. It's up until 1880. It's down after 1880. The absolute god that is Greg Thornton has done this rather marvelous version himself. He takes it on a little bit further into the sort of recovery in the 1890s onwards with small ranching. But again, that pattern is established. And I've highlighted here a section. Again, he's got micro stories within this then. He's got little sequence stories that fit within 1886. And, you can see why there's clear reasons there as to why things are going badly wrong. Okay, so This is lovely stuff. If you're wondering about whose work I'm citing, the Twitter handle in the bottom left corner of the screen does keep changing. So keep an eye on that if you're wanting to pick up with these guys and follow them, because they're doing amazing work. So you have got that section, and you can focus in on sections, but you can still go back to that whole synchronous image, and it makes a whole load of sense to you. And this passes the 3-second test. Danny Gorn's work here passes that 3-second test. Is there a story there at a glance? Yes, there absolutely is. The absolute legend that is Hannah Cosworth. This is beautiful. There's some lovely timelines at the bottom, and I'd love you to note here how Hannah has found icons that make sense for the time period. Look at the Newcomer engine, look at the spinning jenny, look at the first factory, look at the first train. She's got icons that, as close as possible, relate to what the story she's trying to tell. But it's the top timeline that I love about this knowledge organizer, because that's what this is. This is a knowledge organizer. She slots the Industrial Revolution into a window between the medieval and the modern, right? And she anchors it within a broader story, so the kids can have a sense of where things are going. If you started every single inquiry or unit with this stuff, that would be really helpful, I think. But again, it's that synchronous processing. Right then, let's talk about a sense of period in conceptual development. And I can only apologise to anybody who's seen me do this before, but I've got an option for you guys as well. What I'd like you to do is consider this. I've got a problem with my GCSE kids and their sense of the medieval period. They're not very good at it. They've done a bit of it in year 7 and they haven't really come back to it since. We're starting to fix that with our key stage study curriculum and some longer term questions and stuff, but it's a bit fuzzy by the time they get to GCSE. And I want them to understand, I don't know, what it's like in 1060 before the Norman conquest. And you sort of see diagrams like this. This is meant to be the feudal system, and it's really struggling to carry that load, I suppose. We kind of end up with a thin layer of knowledge and a pretty superficial diagram, and you can see the problems with it immediately. You can see the problems with it. If you tell a medieval merchant or an 11th century merchant that he's on a rank with a farmer, you're really going to struggle. Yeah, like he is not going to be very happy with you about that. Also, at this, the Pope and the Church and God are all on a level with each other, which is problematic, but they're also all above the king, which is equally problematic. And if you've taught anything about the relationship between the monarchy and the church, if you start by encoding this structure into your students' heads, that's really difficult, right? So we've got to be really careful of this. Now, the next process I was going to do is a kind of draw along thing, but Tom reckoned the internet would break, so I've drawn it in stages for you. But I'm going to, on this diagram, you can't really sort of place the concepts you want to place. They don't get an understanding of land, of loyalty, of fealty, of like the things that they have to be tacked on the side, you know, service and military service and taxes going sort of up the side towards the king, and then land being handed down from the king. But again, that process of land holding is really complicated. And the king giving land to the lords is very different to the serfs aren't being given land. So that last arrow on the right-hand side is very confusing. So we have some issues. Now, if you've seen me do this stuff, let's say at the HA conference or something, mute me for 5 minutes and have a go at this as a recall task. How much can you remember about an English manor from the last time we did it? Because it will demonstrate to you the power of dual coding for recall. Okay, so if you've seen me do this before, that's all right. Take a 5-minute mute and see what you can remember. Okay, and I'd love to see pictures on Twitter of anything. If people have seen me do this before, what can you remember would be amazing. So don't cheat. See if you can remember it, if you've been at HA or whatever. Otherwise, this is how I teach manorialism. Okay, this is how I teach the relationship between power and land in about 1060. So let's take an English manor. Now, I'd want you to notice, first of all, that a manor is not a house. We now think of manors as houses, but that's not true. That's not what a manor was. Okay, so you can start to build things. We have a Thane's longhouse in the middle. We have that's offering protection for the village. We have churls, clusters of family homes there. We have thralls' huts. These are the slaves, okay? But what are they all doing? Well, they're farming, and they're strip farming. And we've got summer and winter and spring planting sessions going on. And you can build up this picture. There's some grazing land. There's some woodland for fuel and forage and hunting. And you can start to, and the kids are drawing this along with me as I go. This is our note-taking. And they love it. And we've got a reeve here measuring the strips at 16 foot wide. We've got a stone cross now where people are worshipping. We have a mill and a smith. We have a sense here of an orchard, maybe. I can add in whatever details I like. Okay. Now, we can think about relationships. We can think about it as a community. We can think about it as a balance between rulers and ruled. We can think about the land being owned by a thane or by, church priests or free peasants. And we get a sense in 1060 of what this might have looked like. And we build up this patchwork quilt of England. And we say that the thane is the person with the loyalty to the earl. And he provides soldiers for the earl and collects taxes for the earl. And the earl has loyalty to the king. And that's the system of power. But it's rooted in the land. It's rooted in the countryside. And it's based around a strong sense of community. The thane's fence there is for the village to hide in if they get attacked. Okay? And then what we can do is I can get them to recall it. So towards the end of this Normans course, we've done a load of studying about the conquest, 1066, the castles, the rebellions, all that stuff. And then I can say, right, guys, retrieve it. And they draw something that's pretty similar. It hasn't got everything they need, but it's pretty similar. They've remembered the key elements of it. Okay, so this then comes through, and this is how the knowledge is organized. This is a knowledge organizer, okay? And it's rooted so thoroughly in the sense of period that I'm trying to establish. And then we can do this, right? I can show them the change in continuity when a Norman lord arrives. The castle is the dominant feature in the village. There's a new stone church. The church and lord are working in partnership with each other to control. Right? Or are working in partnership to lead, however you want to phrase that. Slavery is abolished. Rent is paid to the lord for the land. You have to pay the lord to use the mill now. The fish pond is now owned by the lord. There's a new forest law. The forests are guarded. There's no access to the English. The land ownership changes. Right? Why have they abolished slavery? Well, because as peasants, they have to pay rent, right? So you can spot then. And we're talking now about control and dominance and exploitation, okay? There is a change over time. And this is dual coding. This is a story. This is a narrative built into a resource that uses the dual coding effect. The 3-second test for each of these diagrams, you get it. And I draw it from fresh every single year with my students because it has to be a process they're involved in. This is reading pages of a textbook and creating a village like this, right? That's what we're doing. Of course, you can use other images. This is Corfe in Dorset. Right? You can build up senses of how this echoes down through time and how we can still see elements of these things. This is a picture of the church from the castle. This is the village I've just drawn, right? It's not, but anyway. It could be. That's the point. Okay? And so we now have, loads of other ways we can do this. Paintings offer a really rich theme. And this is the last thing I want to talk about because I realize I'm running out of time. Paintings and rich images, you get so much dual coding from. Look at this. Let's do it bit by bit. Let's look at the field structure. Let's look at the houses and the buildings, right? Let's look at those changes. We've gone from a defensive castle to a kind of more lordly manor house. The church has been improved. That's clearly still rich. There's some continuities there. You can look at the houses on the street. They're broadly in the same place, but some of them have got bigger. The pasture, the fields have gone from crops to pasture land for sheep. We've had a process of enclosure. But then you can snapshot each one. You look at them and go, early medieval, early modern. You can look at the two sides of it and go, yeah, that's it. I get it. The river's still important, right? There's still their water supply. It's still agriculture. There are still things that haven't changed. But interrogating this kind of image is powerful dual coding. And you could get them to do a quick diagram of this as recall, right? It's very straightforward. And you don't have to, being aware of the effect you're trying to create, though, is crucial. So, rich images. Look at this beautiful medieval longhouse recreation by Peter Dunn of Warren Percy in Yorkshire. At a snapshot, you can look at it for 5 seconds and understand the lives of these people. And immediately kids go, oh, animals in the house. And then they go, oh, no, wait, this is community, this is family, this is looking after each other. They're solving their problems with the technology they have. They're smoking meat above the fire because that's how they preserve it. There's no fridge here. So, and they go, sir, it looks like an upside down boat. And you go, that's a surprise. They're using similar construction techniques to keep water out. Yeah. So you can do so much with rich images. Here's my favorite, or one of my favorites. And this I work with Ollie Cav as well. This is across the continent. It's the most famous painting in American history textbooks. It's used in loads of American history textbooks. But there's a story here, right? If you divide it in two and then you think about empty and full, this is manifest destiny made into an image, okay? And it's the railway lines and the road that cuts, the wagon roads that cut through from full to empty. And you can, again, diagramize that, and it can become an understanding of what manifest destiny was. And we know it's a racist process of colonization, but from this source, we can understand the perspective. And then we notice on the right-hand side, the Indians in the smoke, right? Again, this sort of, they're being sidelined, left behind by the march of technology. The story here is clear, especially if you work to clarify. The same here. If you describe the left-hand side of the line versus the right-hand side of the line, you get very different sets of stories. Now, I realize this is a product of its time, and therefore the imagery is difficult and should be challenged. And you should highlight to the kids how, you know, you've got this kind of, there is something about light and modern and civilized connected to this white female figure. That's really problematic, and we need to be really clear about that. But you've got the telegraph cables, you've got the trains, you've got, you know, the city on the far right. And then you've got the sort of uncivilized, wild and shadowy world moving ahead of it. It gives you a sense of what we're talking about, and they can describe each side of it. And then you can do the whole thing, and you can go, oh yeah, there are some similarities here. Yeah. So there's lots and lots of really rich ways that you can start to explore this dual-coded effect. Okay? Be aware of what you're looking at. Okay. This is a propaganda story. This is a propaganda piece of art, actually, produced in 1940, really quickly turned around by the artist. And you've got chaos to safety, death to calm, war to peace. The story's there. Darkness to light, right? The story's all the way there. So, 3 key principles that I want you to take away today then. Keeping history at the heart of it, looking to problem solve, and using both parts effectively. Does it pass that 3-second test? Is it processing synchronously? Does it make sense if you just glance at it? Does it tell you a story? Does it tell you some history? And if it doesn't, you might not be getting the dual coding effect that you're hoping for. Okay, that's me ranting done. And what happens next? Magic, presumably.
At around about this point, we say an incredible thank you to Hugh, and then Alex comes in and saves me, which is good because I don't do the talky bit, do I, mate?
he does the techie flashy stuff, and I do the talking nonsense. So thank you so much. That was incredible, and particularly like the last segment as well. I'd never thought about kind of drawing lines and separating stuff off. Like, I don't teach American West, but that Dunkirk painting I've used so many times, and I never thought about segmenting it off and just kind of really stripping it back in that way. And when you had the American West kind of images side by side, and you were looking at the similarities in that box, I thought that was really, really great too. And the idea of the timelines with containers, genius, absolutely genius. So thank you so much for that. So we've got some time to ask you some questions. So if you've got any questions, please do put them into the chat, and we'll be able to ask those. We've got a lot of love coming through, in particular for the kind of the timelines that you've got. What else have I noticed has been coming through on here? So we've got things like
I'll just mention one actually that I think does need to be flagged, that you know, we had a good day from South Australia coming in that one, which is wonderful. I mean, this is surely one of the greatest things about online CPD that this situation has thrown to us. So that's nice. Yeah,
there's been some really, I'm on the wrong account, that's why I can't find them. What a donut, honestly. So like the how many grannies is getting a lot of love today. Like the idea of just really making it something which the children can kind of understand, because time is very, very abstract. You know, the fact that they can't even understand kind of the 80s, and well, I still can't. What I found out, was it last night, that the royal family was 24 years ago, the first episode was. He died. Oh my god, I'm getting old. So it's like one of those things for children to think about when the Black Death was. That's just an expanse of time. You get to a certain number and it's just kind of unfathomable, and they can't kind of do it. So let's have a look at what questions have come through. So we've got one from Sophie Hudson, which is, where can you get good icons? Where can you get good icons?
Yeah, so the good icons thing is a real problem for us as history teachers. A lot of people use Noun Project, which is a free source of icons, and it kind of works. But the real problem we have is things start to get quite warped quite quickly, because actually spending enough time hunting for an icon that actually is period relevant and not too kind of misleading, I suppose, in terms of, or anachronistic, I guess, in terms of what the image it's creating, is hard to do. And I think you have to think carefully about how that might work. So if you're trying to do, I don't know, like my one had visitors to the medieval abbey way back at the start of the presentation. I used a horse for that, or a horse rider, because that's how they're arriving, and that's the closest I can get to something that would look like a medieval visitor to the abbey. I wouldn't want to use something like a camera, which might give an impression of a modern tourist. I don't really have an answer to that, because history is so, I mean, what icon are you going to use for government over time? You could use a crown, or you could use the Parliament logo from today, or you could use a ballot box. You know, that concept changes. So unless you change your icon as well, I think icons potentially are really problematic in history. Hannah's example from earlier in my presentation, she's done a lot of looking for icons like that. I honestly don't know where I would go other than Noun Project. And I'd just say, you might need to spend a lot of time trying to find it, and it might drive you mad trying to find one that actually works.
You raise a really interesting point there when you talk about how would you, like, what icon would you use for government? Because I mean, even the Russian revolutions of 1917, I mean, what one icon would work for that in terms of government? Well, you know, there's not one that would fit all three kind of types of government which took place in that year. So that's a really, really good way of thinking about it. And yeah, I have to say, I think it's one of those things where you say, try not to kind of almost go down like a rabbit hole like Alice in Wonderland when you're trying to find these images, because you'll find that like 2 hours has passed and you've created like a resource like in 2 hours, which could have taken about 10 minutes. And that's a lot of planning time. I have to admit, like back in the day, and I'll cough when I say this, clip art. I used to do the same clip art where I'd spend hours on that and the transitions on my PowerPoints, heaven forbid. And so you're right, it's about kind of being really kind of slick and pithy and concise about the ones that you're going for, and not spending hours scavenging for kind of images, trying to make them make sense if they don't make sense as well.
The other thing I'd just say, sorry, is draw your own. You can really simply draw your own. And if you're really struggling with drawing, then trace an image. So trace a picture you want into a simple outline. Might take a long time, but if you're really struggling, one or two of them could really help.
So say if you were like a HOD of history and you wanted to implement dual coding into your department in terms of practice, what would be your 3 top tips for implementing it?
So the first thing is to identify problem areas. Okay, so where are the kids not understanding stuff? Where do you always get to an end of unit assessment or end of year assessment and they haven't got it? Target that area first, and then start to think about, how might I graphically organize this image, or graphically organize this topic rather. So what I've done with my department is I led some department meetings explaining the theory to them, and then and then we had Ollie Cav come and talk to us as well, which obviously isn't going to be something that everybody can have. But we then spent a load of time thinking about a particular couple of problems. So how would we solve the teaching of, let's say, American Reconstruction, which is one of our areas? We had a look at that and gone, actually, we could try and do it as this live and graph thing, and it worked really well. So I would say target those problem areas. I would say try and make it really clear that, you know, set them the challenge of it needs that synchronous processing test. And if it doesn't pass that, you're barking up the wrong tree. And just try and keep that really clear for them. The other thing I would advise is getting Oliver Caviglioli's book and using some pages from that, because actually he gives you loads of ways you can graphically organize things. And it's a really fascinating way to look at that. So I would say get your theory right, and then target some problem areas would be my major tips there.
Amazing. We've had a question come through from History is Fun, isn't it though? And it's, could you give the students different halves of pictures and then link to interpretations?
Okay, sorry, could you repeat that question?
Could you give the students different halves of pictures and then link to interpretations?
Okay, so in that Dunkirk one, you could, for example, cut it diagonally down the middle and say, here, you've each got a piece of Dunkirk. What impression does it give? What has the artist tried to create? And then you could put one corner up on the board and ask the class, you know, how has this been interpreted? What methods has the artist used to interpret these events? And then you bring up the other half and you put the thing together, and they can kind of unpick that propaganda really nicely there. So yeah, I think thinking about historical interpretations in particular, historical reconstruction, artistic reconstructions as interpretations is a really fascinating process. So what is it that the artist has done to create a particular vote? How have they interpreted the evidence in front of them? It's really interesting, yeah.
You've also done a lot of work with Cape practice in terms of retrieval practice. So I'm just wondering, obviously you've talked about dual coding, like, can you again talk to us about how, you know, dual coding works with retrieval practice? Because a bit like using the Ofsted lingo, we've sequenced these talks so that they kind of fold over on one another. So how retrieval practice, dual coding, how do they interlink and kind of support one another?
I think particularly if you've introduced something in a graphically organized way, drawing that framework again and asking them to add the detail to it is brilliant retrieval practice. So if you look at Danny Gorn's or Greg Thornton's rise and fall of the cattle industry thing, just draw the arc, just walk into the room, draw the arc on the board, say, right guys, make a version of that in the back of your books and label as much as you can. And if you can't remember exactly what date events happen at, don't worry about the date, just put it roughly on the right place. Is it at the start of the rise? Is it at the end of the rise? Is it at the beginning of the fall? Is it at the end of the fall? Is it at the peak? Is it, you know, they can start putting roughly where events go, and then you can start to build that framework in their heads. So if you've taught it in a graphically organized way to begin with, fantastic. Challenge them to recreate it, and you'll be amazed how they geographically locate things on that diagram as they go, and they'll think that's at the peak rather than that's in 1880. But actually, that's at the peak is a really interesting way for them to think about the history. You know, so yeah, there's lots and lots of powerful options for combining dual coding and retrieval practice for sure.
Now, you've kind of shown yourself as a bit of an expert, so I'm going to go a bit left field with this one, so I hope it's all right. So obviously you've had the privilege of Ollie Cav in there, and you've mentioned about Huntington Research kind of really focusing in on kind of dual coding. So we have got people within the history community, you might be kind of a director of humanities or Hod Humanities, and we've got people who might kind of teach RE and for their sins geography. So with that, you know, what cross-curricular kind of connections can be made? Because obviously we're very much looking at how vocabulary, so what a source is in history compared to a source in RE, and making this really explicit with our kind of vocabulary about where there's that commonality and that difference. So how with dual coding can we further identify cross-curricular and kind of support that schema development?
It's a great question. And the answer is going to infuriate you because, as I said right at the top, we've got to bring the dual coding to the history. So we've got to stay rooted in our practice. And so that's a question, as I think Tom was saying earlier about potentially running this with different subject areas. That's a question for an RE specialist. I mean, there'll be elements that can be translated. I think probably timelines of changing views over time, for example. I literally have no idea. But there are obviously, geography uses all kinds of diagrams regularly, you know, so they've got lots of expertise in using like the river course, for example, from the source to mouth type diagrams. There are lots of diagrams in history, in geography, sorry, that they use all the time. In terms of some of the stuff I've discussed, they could definitely be using rich imagery in similar ways, and there's lots of that kind of element going on. And they still want to be ensuring that whatever they create passes that 3-second test, has that synchronous processing element. Other than that, they need to work that out as subject specialists. And I don't know a thing about it.
Yeah, I thought I'd come in a bit left field with you.
Yeah.
No, that's really, really useful because, you know, as you identify, it's about making it purposeful to your subject. And I think quite often, and with the best intentions, schools will implement kind of like a pedagogical practice such as dual coding or literacy. But then what does that mean within your own subject area? So, you know, whilst it is that you might have things like kernel sentences and that sort of thing, you know, that might be, you know, something that which in history, but that's not always going to work in maths, but actually it would on comparison questions in maths. So making sure that it's purposeful and matches kind of the content, the curriculum, as Ashley was saying, rather than that. So I think you're absolutely right with the dual coding. It's about make it work for your subject area. And if it is that there are commonalities, maybe, you know, like, you know, a nunnery, you might use maybe similar things. I don't know. You use maps for dual coding, or is that just completely geography?
Massively. No, maps are maps are one of the. I was going to include a section on maps actually, so I kind of regret not doing it, but I timed it all right, I think, so that's fine. Maps are massively powerful, and maps you can call to mind. I mean, there are certain maps that you can call to mind very, very quickly. If I said, "Where is slavery in the USA?" you've drawn a map in your head almost immediately. You can. I tell the whole story of 1066. The only note taking we take is on a sequence of maps. Why not? Battle maps, but map of the country, everything. And so they're really, maps are fascinating and really powerful things. And there are really good books. There's a book called Brilliant Maps, and there's various Twitter accounts about maps who offer maps of the past and all sorts of stuff. Really worth finding, because you end up with really different understandings of how things happened, and you start to realize things. You start to realize things that would sort of not perhaps dawn on you otherwise. So I listened to because Will Bailey Watson told me to. I listened to in our time about Stamford Bridge, and they pointed out that to get from Stamford Bridge to Hastings, you would pretty much have to walk past Hardrada's ships, right? So if you're a military commander in the 11th century, do you walk past the biggest stockpile of military hardware in the country at that time? Or do you get on those ships and sail down the coast, right? You get on the ships and sail down the coast. And also you realise that that's the river that Edward and Morcar need to use to get their reinforcements down to Hastings in time. That's how they're doing it. They're sailing down the coast, but they can't get through the blockage created by Hardrada's unused ships. Hardrada arrives in 300, leaves in 26, 24, something like that. But it makes a lot of sense for Godwinson to actually take his soldiers south on a ship. And that kind of changes how I teach Hastings, because these soldiers might not be as tired as I thought they were, right? Yeah. They fight for 9 hours at Hastings. How are they managing that? Well, they might have got hitched a lift on some Viking ships on the way down. But the mapping of that means that you go, hang on, sir, they're walking straight past the boats there. And you go, oh yeah, hang on. And there's proper historians thinking about that as well. But you can uncover all sorts of stuff when you start mapping things. One of my favorite things with maps actually is if you turn the map of Europe upside down and you're a Viking standing on the edge of Norway or Denmark, that kind of area, and you look at what is kind of forwards, what's in front of you, you find that it's York and Dublin, right? And that suddenly you understand why the Vikings wash up where they do. You know, forwards and slightly to the right is Dublin, forwards is York, forwards and slightly to the left is Normandy. That's where they sail, right? So just turning maps around can also give you new perspectives, which is really interesting.
Every day is a school day. Hugh, I feel like you need your own podcast, because things right there in terms of the Battle of Hastings and looking at things from the view of the Vikings in terms of Dublin and York, because that does make perfect sense.
Yeah, doesn't it?
That way. Amazing. Well, thank you so much for giving up your time today, Hugh. We really do appreciate it, because we know that you're a very, very busy hod and also a dad who's, managed to navigate your way into being with us today. So thank you very much for doing that. We really do appreciate it, and your takeaways have been absolutely phenomenal. And I have no doubt that, again, you'll have notifications where the conversation will absolutely continue. So thank you very much for that. And we do really appreciate you giving up your time there. And I've learned a lot, including about the Battle of Hastings. So,
you're very, very welcome.
Can't wait to do a pub quiz next time.
You're great. If people want to get in touch on Twitter with ideas, or say, look, I've got this problem, how might you solve it with a diagram? I'm very happy to sketch stuff out, doodle stuff out, and ping it back. So please do get in touch. I also need to point out that this call for podcast stuff is not happening. History Sawyer and Greg are all like, it's not happening, people. Dream on.
I'm looking at something like a Dear Hugh page, like an agony uncle kind of style thing. Dear Hugh, my dual coding, I can't get it right. Can you sort this? So yeah, thank you so much for that. And we apologize if you do get further pressure for a podcast, but I'm okay with that. Thank you very much. Well, I hate to say it, but we have come to the end of another TM History Icon. And sadly, unlike when we are in Sheffield, where the party then goes on to continue with a fantastic Mr. Alsop kind of quiz, or we've had Sally doing it 1 year. So we just want to say thank you so much for joining us today. Just to remind you that the recording and resources are available on the Big Marker link that you were emailed out. So we were originally doing it on Big Marker, and then we've kind of moved place, but that recording and resources within 24 hours will be available on Big Marker. After 30 days, it will then go onto our YouTube. So just kind of give you that clarification on that there. We would also like to thank our sponsors, so Wellbe, Time Travel Edu, and Pupil Progress, because as we said, without them, this just wouldn't be possible. And we very much appreciate the fact that we're able to kind of put on these events thanks to their generosity and their support of our community. A big thank you to Ashley for his amazing session on get rid of VAK, like let's start the movement, let's do this, working smarter instead of hard. To Kate Jones for retrieval practice, which was again incredibly powerful and useful. And when we return to school next week on the 8th of March, when we do the Map Master Move Forward, that retrieval to kind of help them kind of consolidate knowledge is going to be vital. So thank you for that, Kate. And then also to Hugh Richards as well, because dual coding we know is going to be incredibly powerful in terms of supporting children in kind of in their return to school there. We would also like to say again that this event is this event is in memory of David Bones. So our very much beloved Carmel Bones unfortunately lost her husband this weekend. So half of the money that we raised today will be going to the Samaritans. You can read out more about David on the link that we have also attached into the event there as well. He's an incredible person, so please do take the time to read up on him, and also to find out more about the fantastic work that Carmel does if you haven't had the opportunity to meet with her yet. She is an incredible woman. Finally, a big thank you to the team who are amazing as ever, who beavering behind the scenes, you know, Andy Sweet quick on the social medias. He will be like the Diet Coke guy in terms of like the muscles from all the retweeting that he's had to do today, bless him. And to our wonderful Alice, and to Carol, to Tom, and to Scott, who's working hard on the production behind the scene, because I would have absolutely crashed this event. But for someone who's in charge of remote learning, I would have broken the system, and not in a good way. But also a big thank you to all of you for coming along, because again, without you, these events wouldn't be possible. So thank you for supporting, thank you for participating. You're incredible for giving up your Saturday morning to kind of engage in the CPD. And I'll say it once and I'll say it again, but our children are so incredibly fortunate to have practitioners who engage in self-led CPD in order to provide them with the best possible quality of education and to transform them into the history geeks that we are, which is great, and we just want to create more of them. But that's due to the passion that you show in the classroom and the expertise, and that's due to the time that you invest in it. So thank you so much, and we hope that on the 8th of March that you have a very successful and positive return. And if anyone's like me, I don't think my feet are going to remember what shoes feel like. So good luck as well with that. And alas, you know, definitely putting on shoes is going to be a weird thing, and not wearing pajama bottoms. So thank you so much. And we hope that you're well and have a fantastic and well-earned weekend. Bye.